I hope we have a quorum.
One step at a time, Michelle.
I know.
One step at a time.
Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. You holding up okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
Good, good, good. Glad to hear it.
Trying to enjoy some of this nice weather.
I know it's gorgeous, right?
Yeah. This is like the best part, right? May and June, just before the heat starts to set in.
You know what though, even around here, so before I lived here, I was in St. Louis for 7 years, which was awful humidity and heat wise.
Yeah.
And there's no escape and there's no water access or anything. So at least here it's like I can go to the beach. If I'm really fussy, I can just go drive up into New Hampshire into the pine forest and the temperature drops 15 degrees and I'm happy, you know. So it feels so nice to have options, you know.
We have this area, we're lucky. We have lots of options, and you're right. You can go to the beach, you can go up to the North Country, you can go down the Cape. Like,
yeah,
we're very fortunate. Yes.
Yes, it's very good to have lots of different ways to be able to chill out when you need to. So I'm loving the quality of life improvements for sure. Here we go.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Patty. Good to see you.
Nice to see you.
Four. So it looks like we have a quorum.
Hey, Michelle, it's Tony.
Oh, Tony, thank you. I was just going to ask who was on the phone.
I'm going to go on mute.
Appreciate it.
Michelle, I saw some correspondence with Dave. Is he stepping down for a little while?
I don't know. He hasn't been at the last few meetings, and so he has some family matter going on. So that's why I wanted to make sure you saw that. I'll follow up next week, see what's going on. I hopefully, something that passes quickly and he can rejoin us.
Yeah, I'm just questioning it because it could affect our quorum.
I know.
Yeah. So if he's not here, and I know Heather's not here anymore, so.
Yeah.
That leaves
so we can follow up with Tony next week or after town meeting, and figure out how we want to, look at that. Okay. So I think we'll get started. Thank you, everyone. Welcome to the Nahant Housing Production Plan Advisory Subcommittee. The chair would like to call the meeting to order at 6:34 p.m. In attendance is the chair, Michelle Capano, Patty Karras, Mark Connon, Michael Raworth, and Patrick O'Reilly. We're joined with our trusted advisors from MAPC, John Cruz, Alex Kopelman, and Christian Brandt. Jim Walsh is also joining us, and we're also joined with the town administrator and members of the public. So I think we'll get started. So thanks, everybody. I have the agenda up, so hopefully you can see it. We'll continue our discussion on affordable housing options with MAPC tonight. We'll talk about the HPP open house or virtual open house, put some clarification around that. And we'll get into more on that when we reach that topic. There will be a second community engagement on June 15th. We've had to make that change to accommodate the Johnson School 6th grade graduation. And then some other activities leading up that we want to make sure that we have appropriate coverage and support. Certainly, I'd like to host a table at town meeting promoting the virtual open house and the second community engagement, and any new business before the committee, and then citizens forum, and then we'll adjourn. Okay. All right. So the first thing is we want to continue the dialogue on affordable housing options. I sent the committee resent to you the development and constraints and opportunities map that we had talked about previously, as well as the HPP goals and strategies. John, I think you wanted to walk us through the second document tonight and talk a little bit about that. I know one of the goals we were going to change, and we had talked about that at the previous meeting, but we want to get just to make sure there's more people in attendance today talking about it a little bit further and then moving that forward.
Yeah, so we have our own facilitation agenda for tonight.
Great.
Can we make Alex a co-host so we can share the screen?
Absolutely.
I think I've actually got it. Can you all see that?
There we go.
Yes, perfect.
All right, terrific. Yes, thank you, Michelle, and it's a pleasure to be with everyone and enjoying the nice weather as well, which is extra nice in a place like Nahant. So we've got a media agenda to get through tonight. I understand that you were able to talk about the development constraints and opportunities analysis from last week. It sounds like not everyone was there, but that's okay. We'll go through it all together. But if you want to refer to that document, as well as the other document that outlines the draft HPP goals and strategies outline that we've prepared for discussion tonight, you'll be able to really dig into the details, but you can also feel free to just follow along here on the slides. So like I said, we've got a lot to go over tonight, so we'll try and be as efficient with our time as possible. We're going to preview the online open house that Michelle discussed, so you can see what it will look like and give us your thoughts on how we can best engage folks through that. And then John's going to do kind of an overview of the development constraints maps to see if you have any questions to set us up for a more lengthy discussion of what this means for the recommended opportunity areas and in places that we'd like to study further for potential 3A zoning. And then we will get into another big discussion on the strategies that have been recommended based on the HPP goals that the committee endorsed at our last meeting. So really the purpose of tonight is to make sure that as a committee, we feel comfortable with the development opportunity sites and potential areas of 3A study that we would like to gather public input on, and that we also feel comfortable with recommendations for strategies in this plan that we want to collect input on in June. So those are really the two big things that we want to walk away with tonight, is consensus on what we feel comfortable gathering input on in terms of opportunities for development and in terms of recommended strategies. Doesn't mean these things make their way into the final plan, but we want to make sure that as a committee, we feel comfortable having a conversation with the public about them. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Christian, who's going to give you a preview of the online open house.
Thanks, Alex. So if you go to the next slide, the online open house includes two sort of big, well, there's three components, two of which are the digital version, and then one of which is some beefed up outreach. So I wanted to start with the one of the digital components, and that is Social Pinpoint. So Social Pinpoint is a digital tool that MAPC is currently piloting. We've used it, we've deployed it in a few projects to great success so far. You can see a screenshot of the tool here. I can also show you what it looks like if you think that would be helpful. Like in real, like I can show you what the interaction looks like. But essentially, it's an online and interactive mapping tool where people can give feedback, in this case, on opportunity areas, recommendations. There's multiple mechanisms that you can use to do this, but the one in Social Pinpoint, but the one that I can show you here is basically people can drag and drop a pin on the map, which will then give them the option to leave a comment where they drop the pin. And we can frame this in a lot of different ways for people, so it's pretty flexible in terms of like what we're asking them. This just gives us the option, the ability to collect place-specific comments, which I think is really helpful. So they can also interact with each other's comments. So if you leave a comment, someone else can respond to that. It is moderated through an algorithm, but also it's moderated through us. So we have the ability to approve or deny comments. Because we're a public institution, we don't want everything to go through one individual approving them. And so the way in which Social Pinpoint does this is that they have like keywords that they filter out, so they won't let you use swear words in a comment, for instance. But we can also add additional words to that, and then anything we can sort of like go in and moderate stuff as we see fit. So there's obviously some nuances to this, but I just wanted to show you an example of one that we used in Essex. So that's what the screenshot that you see on the page here. I want to go on to the next part of this because, and then if we want to look at the interactive, what this actually looks like, I'm happy to return to that, but I'll have to share my screen. So we'll just do that if that's helpful. So then the second part of this is just a simple Qualtrics survey, which we,
Christian, I have one quick question, please.
Yes.
Was that something that will be on the screen at our meeting, or it will be available afterwards online that people can go in and make comments after the meeting?
That's a great question, Jim. Thank you for asking that.
So let me jump in here for a second. So
yeah, please, Michelle.
what we're looking to do is this virtual open house is like an online survey tool. We'll be able to release it probably as early as like next week. Yeah. We can, once we, determine how long we want to run this, we could run this for several weeks or leading right up to the community engagement a month, and continually promote through, all the tools that we have available through the town hall, social media, probably get an article in the newspaper or something to let folks know that this is available. We want Nahant residents to take a look at it, respond to some of the options that are going to be in the tool. I think I'm excited about this because it's going to give people an opportunity to look at, what we're thinking, as well as look at what people's comments are as well, to determine, oh, I like that idea that person said, I can, upvote it or downvote it, that kind of stuff. So very interactive, but certainly using digital in a way to gather more information because, folks like, today, like to use Zoom, and we're very successful at holding, Zoom meetings and stuff. We still need the in-person interaction as well, but this will give folks another level of being able to participate if they haven't been able to follow us either through the YouTube meetings or, checking out the town's webpage for our committee.
Got it.
Sorry if I've gotten confused. This is meant to be in addition to a future face-to-face forum, correct?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. If you remember early on, one of the things I had asked for was, could we do some type of survey, whether it be, 10 questions or something, and Tony was able to get a little bit more money for us for this project, and MAPC came up with this option. So I'm really excited about that. We're going to be able to do this.
So yeah, and
Okay.
I'll just add quickly that the big purpose of it is, for one, to start getting some input on sites for the in-person forum at Town Hall in June. And then also to preview the goals that we've established, so that hopefully folks will be a little bit familiar with those before they come to the forum in
Right.
June, because the strategies and recommendations are gonna correspond to those goals. So yeah, it's like an extra point of
Right.
engagement to prime people for the forum.
And the goals that we're talking about are those that are set forth in the attached strategy.
Yeah, and we
Goals
also
and
reviewed
strategies.
them. We also reviewed them at our last meeting. So those ones are pretty much like, the goals are pretty much set, but then the strategies that are in the document are new. So we'll go over those tonight.
So,
Okay,
so
and,
this
and,
will,
I'm sorry, and
go ahead.
the things that are in this document that we've just had, came to us in the attachments are going to be visible to the people who get the opportunity to use this new tool to comment on specific locations. Is that right?
This tool will just have the sites that we agree we want to present for public input tonight, as
Yep.
well as some background information, like, we're not going to be developing parks and protected open space, things like that, so that they understand that. And it's just going to be the sites that we come to consensus on through this meeting for the mapping. And then the other section of it, which Christian's going to describe how it works in a moment here, is just going to be the goals. The strategies will then be really focused on at the in-person forum. So this is basically to prepare people for that and to make sure we've already engaged people around these other big topics before we go in depth on all the details of the strategy recommendations. That'll be the main focus of the in-person forum.
Yep.
Thank you.
Great.
So the thing that you see in front of you now is also part of the same digital component as I showed you last time, except we're combining two digital tools. So the first one was Social Pinpoint. This is Qualtrics, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with. It's a basic surveying platform. We use it all the time at MAPC. And the screenshot that you see is from the Essex project where the Social Pinpoint was from. And so essentially this is kind of the same setup that we would use in Nahant, where we have instructions about, at the top about how people can engage with this, like how they should be responding to the questions, just so that they don't get confused. And then where you see it says definition, that's taken from that project, but that would be, instead of saying definitions, it would just say goal number 1, and then it would write goal number 1, and then people can use that you see there's that little circle at the bottom. They can use that to drag to most to least importance. So the way that we set this up for Essex is similar to how we're thinking about doing it for Nahant, is that at the beginning of the survey, we sort of welcome people to the survey. We give some background information, like Alex was saying, that participants can sort of like opt into if they want more information. There's some at the very beginning that will just explain the project that they won't be able to opt out of, but more detail, they'll be given the option to see that or not. Then it will take them to the Social Pinpoint map, which will be embedded in Qualtrics, so they won't have to go somewhere else. And so in the Essex project, the Social Pinpoint map was embedded in Qualtrics, so they'll just get the Qualtrics link. They'll be able to respond to the Social Pinpoint in Qualtrics, and then they'll go to the goal evaluation questions, where we'll be asking them to give feedback about how they feel about those particular goals.
Will the map be annotated with the particular pieces of turf that we're discussing, and the possible actions with respect to each piece of turf?
When you say actions, Mike, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, could you say more
Well,
about
for
that?
example, the space that is over facing Greylock Road, that's adjacent to the cemetery set aside, that's a spot that has been discussed in terms of being one of our target areas. So we'd want to tell people that particular space is there. It is town-owned. It's available. It's got certain geographic limitations and so forth. And here are the several things that are in contemplation that could be done with respect to that space?
Yes, that's a great point. So what I can tell you, Mike, is that each sort of space or opportunity, like development area that we agree on today, like Alex was saying, that we reach consensus about today, those will be added to the social pinpoint map. And then people will be able to click on those things and see background information about it along the lines that you were just describing. And then they'll be asked to provide additional input, both on the social pinpoint map, but also on the specific goals. So we're not including the goals on the social pinpoint page. Those will happen in Qualtrics, mostly because it's just easier for them to be in Qualtrics than in social pinpoint. But certainly, like the information you described we can include that in social pinpoint as a description for each parcel or area that we add to the map.
So I would ask you this too, if people are going to participate, will they be required to identify themselves as citizens of Nahant, provide email or phone or what I'm afraid of is that if somebody was particularly negative, they could try to flood some comments from people outside of town, or one person using multiple identities, people using fake names, things of that sort.
So I think that's a good question, Jim. We can't prevent people from outside of Nahant from accessing these tools, just like we can't prevent people from outside of Nahant accessing public meetings like this. So, someone from outside of Nahant could come to this meeting and do what you're saying. We can't limit the participants in the Qualtrics or the social pinpoint to just Nahant residents. But what we can do is request some type of identifying information. And we often will do this in Qualtrics, where we'll give people the opportunity to leave their name and email if they want more information. We usually don't require that, and that's specifically because we don't want to deter people from participating. When we do, I have just, having worked on, I don't know, probably close to 100 surveys at this point, when we do require that type of information, you see a precipitous decline in participation across the board. So that's not something that I think we should require. But in the social pinpoint page, we can say, if you want to leave a comment, you have to at least identify yourself by your first name. And then we can also discuss, this is something we can discuss with Michelle and Tony if we want to ask for things like email address. We can really customize what information we ask for from people in the social pinpoint. In the Qualtrics, it is not really MAPC's policy to require names and email addresses for large public things like this.
All right, so we won't know necessarily whether a person is from Nahant or if they use multiple identities and nicknames and things like that.
What I will tell you is that in Qualtrics, we have it set up so that Qualtrics tracks, this is not uncommon, but Qualtrics will track the IP address of the participant responding, which makes it so that they're not able to submit multiple entries from the same device. So that is the best way for us to be able to prevent what you're saying from happening. The other thing that we often do is that we request that people identify their relationship to the community. So in the Qualtrics, we can ask, we do this all the time, where we say, please select which option best describes your relationship to Nahant. One choice is I'm a resident, one is I'm a business owner, one is I don't live in Nahant, one is I used to live in Nahant. Sometimes we've done it that way. So we have ways of sort of filtering participants based on their relationship to the community, and we can certainly explore doing that. I would be hesitant to make those required, just because that will prevent Nahanters from actually responding. Some people really don't like having to make that selection, and I think if we're interested in broad participation from Nahanters, we would want to make sure that we're not necessarily making those things required. But it's certainly something that we think about all the time, Jim, in the other
I hear you.
surveys and stuff.
I would suggest you had a couple of categories. One, I'm a homeowner. 2, I rent in Nahant.
Yeah.
3, I'm looking to establish a residence in Nahant, for my family lives in Nahant, but I don't now, something like that.
Yeah, Mike, for a lot of the housing surveys that we work on, we often will have that type of question in like a demographic section at the end.
Right, right.
Similarly, we'll ask people for like race, ethnicity, gender questions as well, just so that we understand, you know, who we're working, who's responding, whether there are gaps in participation, for instance. So.
Right.
And I'll add to that, Christian, you can correct me if you've seen any different anecdotal
Yeah.
stuff, but generally speaking, the people who participate in these surveys are community members, people who
Yes.
Have another interaction with the community. The numbers aren't statistically significant. There may be a handful of folks who live nearby or who spend time there or work there or something like that. But it's almost always the vast majority, nearly all the people who participate are going to be from the town. And I would encourage any of the committee members to think about when the last time you participated in another town's civic activity would be as you think through these things.
Yeah, that's a great point, John. I know Alex just mentioned that we're running about 10 minutes over, but just to add, the only time that I've seen a significant number of people from outside a community participating in a survey is when we've really specifically outreached people who don't live in the community, but who might be like business owners and whose perspective we want, for instance. So, so if we go on to the next section, this is just sort of like another component of the online open house feeding into the community engagement event. So we're really hoping to rely on, like we did last time, on all of you for some additional outreach support. We are a part of this additional work that MAPC is doing. We're going to be developing some more outreach materials that will be just like more user friendly and like given to you sooner in advance of the meeting. So like phone and email scripts if you want to, if that is helpful, instructions and an outreach plan that you could follow, social media, like material that you can post on social media, a flyer, for instance. We already have a flyer and press release developed. We have an RSVP form that we'll be using to check to see how many people are attending, and we can use that to understand, you know, like what kind of outreach we might need to start doing. But in order for this to really work, it's just helpful for us to know that like last time, you will be willing to share this information in your networks, share the information about the forum and the online open house in your networks, on social media, and or with your neighbors, since Nahant is such a neighborly community. So that's just kind of, you know, I wanted to add that note to this. In order for these things to be really successful, it's really great to have your support in helping to publicize these things. So I will leave it at that.
So, Christian, could you show, before we go into development constraints, can we see like what it looks like in real time?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. I will try to keep it quick because I know Alex has a great agenda to stick to. So, but I think, Michelle, if you could make me a co-host, or I actually, I don't think that you can have co-hosts on your.
No, so
if you-
Alex currently has it. If he wants to release it, we can
I
add.
think you are technically the host at the moment.
All right, let me try this. Screen share.
Oh, you know what? I have the ability to share my screen without being made host, so never mind.
Okay,
That must be. Okay, so can everybody see this?
Not yet.
yes.
Now,
Okay.
yes.
Sorry, my Zoom windows are showing up. Okay, so basically this is what it will look like when people get onto the map. It just kind of says, welcome to use this map. Here are some two steps you can take. So I'm going to X out of that. And I think the thing that's really neat about this is that if I wanted to, we do have a tab on the side that's more information about how to use the map, but I'm not going to click on that because we already saw it at the beginning. We asked people in this particular one to drag a little house where they live, which, you know, that's what they wanted to do in this project. That's certainly not something that we need to do with the Nahant one, but basically what happens is that if I take this descriptive words, we ask people to pick a place in Essex and use 3 words to describe it. So if I do that, I'll just like drop it anywhere on this map. And let me X out of this. It brings up this box. And I know it might be a little bit hard to read, but it has the question prompt at the top. What are 3 words to describe this location? I can write words in the comment box. So I'm going to say bucolic, peaceful, beachy, even though what I picked is not really close to the beach. We can give people the opportunity to attach a photo. I don't think we need to do this in this instance. And then I can add my email. So you see it says it's my work email, my first name, I can add my last name. And then the only thing that is required is that I have to agree to the terms and conditions, which is just like, this is a public comment. And I agree that I'm not going to use like profanity, swear words, or anything like that. That's essentially the terms and conditions. I can also click remember, so that way, if I want to select more things, I don't have to add my name and email every single time. It will remember me because it's the same IP address. And I'm not going to click add comment because I don't want this comment to be added to the map because this is currently live. But the thing that's great is that if I wanted to see other people's comments, I can, let me minimize that. I can click on them. So this one says, Centennial Grove is also residents only, with the exception of the YMCA camp and youth baseball games. You can see this person did not follow the prompt, which was use 3 words to describe this location. But that's okay. We won't hold it against them. But you can like or dislike the comment. We can also change that language so that it's not like or dislike. We can change it to upvote, downvote, or whatever. And then you can like zoom. You can zoom out if you want to see it farther relief. You can zoom in if you want to see it closer. You can see I've added some stuff to this map. So there's a zoning district in downtown Essex called the Downtown Zoning District. That's maroon. This yellow line, these yellow lines are scenic roads. And then the municipal boundary is in red. And then there's a few other things up here. That's really the vibe of this. If I wanted to go look at all the comments, I could click on activity over here and I could look through all of them. And if I click on it, it will show me where the comments are. And I can like and dislike and respond to them. So
Purple of the North Shore, I like that. So this is for the social pinpoint.
Yes.
For the locations, but how do they pivot to the goals? What's that experience like? Or are these going to be 2 separate links?
They are not 2 separate links. You're getting a little bit of a peek behind the curtain. Sorry.
That's fine.
Or let me just really quickly open our Essex zoning update and show you the preview. So basically this is what people will see when they go to the survey, and this is how they'll get to the social pinpoint. So this Essex survey looks like this. Very simple, straightforward survey. We'll click to the next page. There will be more background information here. But this is what the social pinpoint map will look like. So you can they'll be able to interact with it here. Just exactly the way that you did. The link will be up here because sometimes if people are on their phone, this won't work super well for them and they'll need to click on the link.
So I was going to ask you that. Are there any limitations with certain browsers? And then the best way to do this is to put it on a laptop or you know, an iPad, for example, which is like a smaller mobile device, just because you want to look at the locations and that kind of stuff, right?
Certainly phones, like cell phones, it's a little bit harder to use this on a cell phone. That's why we added the link here, because social pinpoint is easy to use on a cell phone, just embedded like this. It gets a little chaotic. But I'm looking at this on my laptop, which has a pretty small screen, and it's sufficient. I think tablets probably will also be fine, just based on what I know about these things. And then certainly desktop will also work if that's what people are looking at. And I haven't encountered differences across browsers, Michelle.
Okay,
Um,
good to know, because in case we get troubleshooting questions, you never know what comes
Yeah.
up, so.
But that's why we added this link, because sometimes people's, if it's an old computer, it just having the link here so that people can open it outside of the survey.
Well, yeah, PC versus Macs is gonna be, obviously, okay, cool.
So
Okay,
then to get to the goals, they'll click next, and then now we're in the goals.
cool,
So
okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm lacking some sleep. Okay, all right. It seems pretty intuitive to me, but I think I like it. I'm really excited about this.
great. So I'll let Alex take it away. Thank you for indulging that extended conversation, Alex.
Sorry about that.
No, that's all right.
Well, it's fine. I just want to make sure we all have enough energy for the remainder, because there's a lot of more conversation to come. So with that, I'm gonna pass it to John, who's gonna give an overview of the development constraints and see just basically if you have any questions on what was discussed and shared for your last meeting, so that we can really get into the conversation on development opportunities that will eventually end up in that map that you just looked at, where we will gather input from the public. So take it away, John.
Thank you so much, Alex. So to frame this conversation, everyone, what we're going to do is we're going to talk through the constraint maps, and then we're going to have a discussion about the sites themselves. So as we're talking through this, if anybody has questions specifically about the constraint or the language used or what is actually being shown on the map that isn't made clear by either it's not self-evident or I don't make it clear through my conversation that I'm having with you guys tonight, speak up and let me know on that map. And then when we get to the slides at the end of this portion of the presentation, where we start talking about the development sites and the opportunity areas, and we'll talk about kind of where we see at MAPC are the sites that make the most sense, the sites that don't seem to make a lot of sense, and the sites that we feel like we need a little bit more information on before we can really come to some conclusions on. So as long as we're all in agreement for all of that, we're going to keep moving things forward. And to just kind of frame everything in a way that's going to be useful for our conversation, this should be something a little bit familiar, but we've gone ahead and added all these different letters to the sites to help us identify them a little bit more. But there's nothing new here. There isn't anything that you guys haven't seen before. And I want everyone to be aware that we did verbally receive some comments about making sure that the existing business area, which is, if you can see Alex's cursor right there at Nahant Road, kind of is the entrance into Nahant Island here. That's something that we're taking a look at as a potential 3A location there at Spring and Nahant Road, but we don't have it labeled here on the map just yet. We have the one that's labeled for the Housing Authority properties, and we're going to be taking a look at the other site as well. So that was really fantastic feedback that we were happy to receive. We just wanted to make sure that all the maps that we're showing today match the ones that you guys took a look at last week. And that way the public is aware that we're all having the same conversation here together as well. So keep this in the back of your heads. We're going to revisit this in a little bit. And we can go ahead and move on to the next slide. So this one is one that is all of the excluded land from the Massachusetts Department of Housing and Community Development. And what they have done is they've said this is land that it's not going to be possible to do 3A development on unless it is a site that's identified in a housing production plan, or if for some reason it was misidentified for one reason or another. So one of the things that they have as part of their criteria is that it's all land that's publicly owned, and they're making the assumption that this land is being held for recreation or for the town hall or something like that. In Nahant's case, there are a handful of sites that are town owned that are not being held for a public use. So things like the Coast Guard housing site, we would absolutely be able to develop on, and we would just have a conversation with DHCD and let them know that that's something we're putting into our recommendations. The same with the Housing Authority site and some other areas. But this generally includes wetlands. It includes areas that are open to flooding. It includes all public rights of way. So you can see all the streets are considered excluded. Any kind of privately owned land that's prohibited to development, and that could be anything to do with impacts on water supply, water supplies, wellhead protection areas, something where the physical features of the site don't make it possible to develop on, and then any other kind of educational or institutional uses. And that could be a hospital, an incarceration facility, a power plant, a water treatment plant, things like that. And DHCD's goals here were just to make sure that nobody is going to look at these 3A regulations and say, well, we're just going to zone the town hall because we know the town hall will never get developed and then we can circumvent the requirements that way. That can't happen. So these are the 7 different criteria that DHCD put together that says you can't do any kind of development here. And I think this is pretty straightforward. We've talked about this a little bit more. I'm also not seeing any hands coming up or anybody who's got a lot of excited things to say. So we're going to go ahead and move on to the next map, which is a protected open space. And there's 3 different classifications here for how open space is considered. One of them is the permanently protected open space, and that's going to be in the dark green. That stuff is nearly impossible to develop on. There's either a deed restriction or there's some other kind of official government decree that says this land has to be left alone. And that could have been something from the state, something from the Board of Selectmen, whatever it might be. But it essentially means any of these areas in dark green are going to be nearly impossible to develop. The areas that have limited open space, which is the light green, it means there's no official protection. There's no deed restriction, there's no decree, there's no law. However, the existing use of the land allows it to continue to be open space. But if that use was to change, that protection could go away. And the areas that are this tan color, they're unprotected open space, and they don't have either of those previous protections, and they could be subject to redevelopment just through a simple change of property ownership, or if the current owners decided to do something different with that property, they could just go ahead and do it, and there wouldn't be any kind of mechanisms in place to stop development from occurring there. Moving on, we have a flood zone map, and this really shows 2 different pieces of data. They are a 1% annual chance of flooding or ponding, which for those who are unaware, these are areas that have a 100-year flood zone, and it means that there's a 1% chance that in any given year, those areas are going to flood. We can see it's the golf course, primarily the dump site, and then it extends a little bit over into the eastern part of Nahant Island. And that's the stuff that's here in the kind of grayish blue color. The green is something that's considered a high-risk coastal area. FEMA calls these V zones. And these are areas where when there's any kind of severe weather event, that could be a big storm or a hurricane or whatever else, it means that the waves are going to be much higher. We're looking at least 3 feet for waves. The water is going to be moving much faster. There's a greater risk to personal safety, a greater risk of property damage, things like that. So these are officially designated by FEMA, and they are things that we just have to be mindful of because there are going to be development constraints. And there's also some town overlay stuff that addresses these flood areas that we're not going to get into just yet, but we'll talk about that a little bit more further down the line.
These green areas, John, they seem to correspond to what I've heard described as being velocity zones or velocity areas. Is that right?
Yeah. So that's
Okay.
what the V and V zones means, is velocity. So it basically means the water is coming at you hard and fast when the storms and the seas get rough. So
Right.
you got to be careful. But
Thank
yeah,
you.
that's exactly right. The next map is a little bit more alarming, and this shows something that's called the median higher high water, which is not a friendly acronym, but basically what it means is that if the sea level was to rise, what would be the likely median high point that the water will get to? And where the blue is currently where the water sits as it is right now, the current sea level. And then if the sea level was to rise by 1 foot, we see that in the very dark red, 2 feet in the dark red, 3 feet in the red orange, and 4 feet in the lighter orange. And when we look at a lot of these different models that predict sea level rise as a result of climate change, they have a 4.2 foot sea level rise, kind of the higher point of the estimations for 2070. So that's where we've stopped our analysis here. And it doesn't change a tremendous lot past 4 feet until we completely flood out the causeways and things like that. But this shows the areas that are potentially or at highest risk of being underwater by 2070. And you can see it very closely corresponds with what that previous flood map looks like. It corresponds very much with a lot of the open space protections and things like that. So we're starting to see at this point, there's a lot of trends and a lot of areas where if you can't develop in an area in Nahant, or it's challenging to develop in an area in Nahant, there's probably a handful of different reasons as to why that is. It's not just one thing. And this becomes evident on the next map that we take a look at as well, but not as strongly. These are the wetlands, and they're a little bit more focused on the coastal areas and the causeway, but they do kind of get into parts of some inland areas that could affect development as well. And there's no real standard definition for wetlands. People kind of adjust it as they need to, but we're talking about areas that are typically saturated with groundwater. You can't just walk through it, or if you do, it would be during a drought or something like that. So this shows the exact locations of the wetlands. It doesn't correspond them to parcel outlines or anything like that. They're often near sea level. They often have a lot of benefits for absorbing floods when there's substantial rainfall and preventing flood spillover onto other developed areas. And they have a myriad of development challenges. And as we've seen before, they're likely to intersect with development constraints like the flood zones, like the sea level rise, all the other things that we talked about previously. The next map is a wildlife habitat map, and this isn't one that we're going to have to worry about a whole lot because there's a lot of corresponding concerns with open space and things like that. But we put the open space on here just to see where it lines up, and we didn't separate it out by type. But we're mostly concerned with these biomap 2 core habitats and these priority habitats of rare species. Most of them are focused on the causeway. A little bit is over at the southeastern tip of Big Nahant Island. And these are areas that are critical for the long-term persistence of rare species. So it's very difficult to develop in areas like this. And realistically, it doesn't make sense to try to do development on the causeway anyways. But we need to understand where this is, understand that there's known extensive different species habitats, and we have to do everything we can to make sure that these are part of our considerations and making sure that we're doing everything we can to protect vulnerable species. I don't think this is going to be a concern for us. I don't see any of these biomap habitat areas or these priority habitats for rare species intersecting with the areas that we've kind of outlaid for discussion. So I don't think there's any concern here, but it's definitely something that we wanted to check just to make sure. The last
Got
map
it,
that we
Michelle.
Yeah.
So one thing to point out though on the map is the Furbus Road area, you've got the Nahant thicket as open space. That should probably be categorized out because the Nahant thicket is a wildlife preserve.
Okay, these are the areas that are recognized as like the official areas either by the federal government or by the state of Massachusetts. So
Okay,
if we feel that needs to be added, we can certainly get in touch with some folks there and say that maybe this needs some additional protection. But we'll also definitely take a look at that as a concern if we're looking to do any kind of redevelopment in that area. So
Yeah.
it could be an unofficial preserve or something that the town set up or something where people know, hey, there's just stuff here and it hasn't gotten the official.
yeah,
protection.
we would not develop in that area.
Yeah.
It has investment from the Audubon and others, so and it's been used by birders, so I cannot see that being developed.
Very cool. Good to know. Thank you very much. That's really helpful information. The last map that we have on our list here, I'm sorry for the folks at home because this is going to be really, really difficult to see. And it's a topographical map. And the way that these work is that you've got all these different lines, and the lines represent the number of feet above sea level, and they're usually 3 meters or 3 feet, 3 meters or so apart, 3 meters, 3 yards, etc. So you can see all the little white dots on here, and those, if we were able to zoom in, which of course we can't a whole lot because it's PowerPoint, but they actually list the numbers there. And the closer these lines are together, the more steep the slope is, right? Because if each one represents a 3-foot elevation distance, If it's expanded out over the course of a mile, you can walk it and not even notice it. But if it happens every single footstep, it's like going up and down a flight of steps. So those are really the differences that we're looking at. And to illustrate this a little bit for the people who might be watching at home, we can see this area just south of the Coast Guard housing site where there are lots of lines coming together, and you can really see the orange. So the slope there is very, very steep. And we know that that's protected open space and we wouldn't develop there anyways, but even just looking at that tells us there's a lot of challenges here. Whereas some of these other areas, you can see the lines running through, you can see that there's not a whole lot of concentration of that orange, and it looks like it would be much easier to develop. They have a much more level grade than a lot of the other parts of the site, and parts of the town. So we just need to be mindful of this. This is another development constraint when we're building on an island that has a lot of interesting elevation points, a lot of different places where things change. And we just need to make sure that this is something that we are looking at and saying, hey, does it really make sense to build on this site? Or does it look good on paper? And then you realize that half of the site is much lower than another half. So all important things that we need to be considering as part of all of this. So we have all of this data and we put all these things together to do all this GIS analysis. What does it actually mean? How does it look? What are we going to do with all of it? So we're really excited to hear everyone's thoughts. We want to share with the public what our thoughts are before we get into that. So this next slide is just going to reiterate the map that we already saw to bring this back fresh into our minds, all of the different sites that we have here. And what we did was we just went ahead and put them together into a list. And I'm going to show this real quick, and we're going to go ahead and move on to the next one. This kind of just lists them in order: A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And then, like I said earlier, we categorize them by the sites that we think make a whole lot of sense and the ones that are going to be really challenging. So the sites in green here are the ones that we feel have a lot of things that check a lot of boxes for us. So we see that we're trying to recommend them for the HPP. Some of them we're recommending for 3A, some of them are both. The ones that are in yellow are the ones that we feel like we need a little bit more information on. We heard some comments that the church property may not make a whole lot of sense. Some of these other properties have a lot of, they look like they could be home to wetlands, but it's not entirely evident to us because we don't live there, if they're actually functioning wetlands or if there's actually going to be development constraints that are going to affect what we can do with a site like that. And we have the two areas that we don't really see a whole lot of development opportunity for. One of them is the dump site, which is a protected open space, wouldn't be possible anyways, and is within the flood zones and the high risk coastal flooding areas and things like that. And then also the Bass Point Apartments site, which we don't see as an opportunity because realistically, we don't think the market is going to support redevelopment of that site at any point during our lifetimes. So we think the Bass Point Apartments is going to stay the way it is for quite some time. And looking at that as potential redevelopment just doesn't seem feasible from a market standpoint. We also don't see any of the open space on that site as being realistic for doing any additional development on. The residents use that for recreation, and that also falls within the floodplain, which makes for a lot more additional development challenges.
Let's pause this to the Bass Point Apartments for a second. There was a fair amount of discussion about this last week because it's already developed its high density. And I asked a question, I think, and somebody answered it, that there is no when it comes to 3A, there's nothing that impedes designating an already densely developed area as a 3A area for the town. Am I incorrect about that?
That is correct. So what happens with the 3A regulations is it's not talking about what is existing on the site at all. What currently exists there from a regulatory standpoint for 3A does not matter. It could be a vacant site. It could be a site that has a higher density than what's required in 3A that's already built out, a site that has much lower density than what's already built out. But at the end of the day, what's currently there is not as important as what the potential to be there in the future is. And if we go on to the next map, that might help visualize things a little bit better than what the spreadsheet looks like. And here we have the different sites. along with the ones that we are not recommending have been excluded. So they're still labeled, but the shape outlines are gone. And we see ones that are opportunity sites only shaded in purple. And the ones that we see as HPP opportunity sites, as well as potential 3A sites, are shaded in green. And then we have the same outlines for either publicly or privately owned development land ownership here. So with that in mind, I'm happy to shut up and listen to what your guys' thoughts on it. I'm really excited to hear about how the discussion went last week around all this.
So I got a couple comments. So the thing about the Bass Point Apartments we talked about a month ago was there is a section of land in there that is undeveloped that could be a potential site if we present it to the owners of the property. So I don't want to discount that. I know you looked at the entire site, but there is a carve out there that could be considered.
Are you talking about the stuff where it's labeled Bass Point Apartments?
Yeah, so if you look above where it says Bass Point Apartments, and then you look at where the word point is,
Yeah.
and you go about another few centimeters above, there's, I think we talked about 30,000 square feet of land that could be developed.
Well, Michelle, isn't that basically a park that's utilized by the residents of Bass Point?
Well,
Well,
Yes
that
and
may be,
no.
but that doesn't prohibit the town from taking action in terms of zoning it differently than it is now, correct?
yeah, so there's a couple of things. So yes and no, it's open space to the residents that live there. There's a pool house, tennis courts. But right next to the tennis courts, there is open space. And I think we talked about that. Could be a possibility if we presented some type of plan and Bass Point Apartments wanted to, and we gave them the opportunity to develop with certain conditions, things like it has to be elderly housing or something to that effect.
So
I don't-
there's two challenges with that. One is that it's all one parcel, so that would require a legal parcel split to allow part of that area for 3A and part of it for not. We don't have that option. We'd have to use the entire parcel. And the other part is that whole area is within the flood zone. And Nahant has a flood zone overlay district, which outlines a substantial number of additional regulatory hurdles that are needed to develop there. Not saying that it's impossible, but it would be very challenging for anyone to do so.
Okay, and then the other clarification, you have J Country Club West. Are we talking about the golf course?
That is not the golf course. That is this weirdly shaped parcel right underneath it, the green one that's right there.
And that one we are labeling as yellow because from the constraints, there's definitely a lot of questions about it. I could definitely see it being taken off, but I wanted to discuss it with the committee first.
I gotta pull-
Seems to me that that's nearly marsh. It's like reedy. It abuts the
Yeah,
golf course.
So it's covered in wetlands from the wetland map, and it's in the floodplain, and it's where there's going to potentially be sea level rise impacts.
So are we saying, is that the one that is in trust
Yes.
at the
Mark?
end of Pine Street? Yeah, we should just take that off, but okay.
Okay.
Does the committee agree that we should take the J off?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
All right, look at that. We're striking things out already.
Yeah.
I'm
What
not,
what others on here would you say like, oh, I'm not so sure about that. Let's talk about that one. Because the
so
other
the Edge Hill
ones we're gonna-
Apartments, I'm sorry, I've got like a lot of feedback. So the Edge Hill Apartments, I mean, those are condominiums, they're privately owned. I don't know if there's an opportunity there, frankly. I
That's,
want to
yeah,
go after
not
things that
being
we have
looked at
viable
as,
opportunities.
it's not being looked at as a development opportunity, but in our committee meeting in April, when we were talking about like what areas would be something that we might want to look at as, say, like a 3A zoning district, it was identified as an area
Okay.
where it's existing multifamily, just the same way that
Yes.
apartments
Yeah.
were.
Okay, now I
So-
see when you go with that, with the 3A, then I
Yeah.
definitely
So-
agree that.
So then I
Okay.
think if the Country Club East K became an HPP and 3A site as we're recommending it here, basically, I think the way you want to think about that is when you start to study it further, you might say, it might make sense, potentially, this would, be an ongoing conversation about whether you would like move the district from there to be on just one site, because, a zoning district should not just be one site typically. That's kind of
Right.
spot zoning.
Right.
So I think you want to think about that one in relationship to K. And the reason it's on the map is because we talked about it as an area where there is already existing multifamily. So the character of the area would be closer matching to the character of a 3A multifamily district.
All right, I have one more and then I'll be quiet. Letter B, it says Fox Hill Road, 4 parcels. That's actually Ward Road. So we need to correct that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
Right.
before we
Now,
leave the
I'll
edge hill,
try to be quiet.
before we leave the edge hill, I ended up being confused in our last discussion having to do with Bass Point. It was my understanding that if you, let's take the Edge Hill apartment area as a current example. It's very densely settled right now. It is, let's assume that there's no room, that there's no barren land on which to develop. In other words, to put anything on it, you'd have to knock something down that's currently existing and being used. None of those constraints, as I understand it, stand in the way of that area as being a target area for 3A zoning. In other words, we could zone that as 3A and accomplish something towards our goal, even if that is not really the objective of 3A. Am I correct about that?
So I'd say that from a regulatory standpoint of what can we actually do, yeah, you can zone 3A pretty much anywhere that's not an excluded location by DHCD. Areas that are excluded locations can be zoned 3A if they are recommended in a housing production plan. But again, when we're looking at that area near the Edge Hill Apartments, we're simply saying that this is an area where existing multifamily is. So when we're thinking about 3A, it wouldn't necessarily be out of character with what's there, or it would make more sense to have a zone that allows multifamily in an area where there is multifamily, so to speak. Same thing with the Bass Point Apartments, but I think that you need to look at it like in relationship to what site is there. So again, like near the Bass Point Apartments, you have sites where we have heard information about there could be some potential to work with a private property owner to encourage them to do something. But we don't want to just be thinking about what can we quote unquote get away with in terms of our 3A regulations. We want to use this as a tool to actually meet housing need.
I understand, and the greater needs are more than what will bare minimum satisfy the statutes. I just wanted to clarify how that works, because it's something that we ought to consider. So your point is that even if we could achieve some of our objectives by 3A zoning, the Edge Hill Apartments, that's if you will, not morally acceptable in terms of the greater scheme of this.
No, I think for that, you're looking at an HPP development opportunity and potentially a 3A zone related to the K site, Country Club East. And then if you're exploring, if you end up doing 3A there as well, it would make sense potentially to expand those district boundaries to meet your acreage requirements for 3A in the state statute.
Yep.
But you understand that there's also a real opportunity here because K is an actual site where we could see something happening. And I would say when you're looking at G, the two Bayside, G and H, the Bayside and the Knights of Columbus parcels, those are areas where you might have legitimate interest from a private property owner to do some development. And then if you wanted to expand that district to meet your acreage requirements, it would make sense to move towards the Bass Point Apartments there. So I think, that's how we're looking at this right now.
Okay, and putting 40B to one side for a moment, the action that's called for under 3A is simply zoning changes that allow greater density than was previously permitted under our bylaw, correct?
Not necessarily, because even if it allowed for higher density in the bylaw, it would just need to be certified as a 3A zone. So even if you already had zones in place that met the 3A regulations, you could just submit that to DHCD and say, here you go, we're all set. So regardless of if there's currently existing zoning that supports higher density or lower density or whatever it might be, there just needs to be a zone that is submitted to DHCD that says this is our 3A zone. And if it's something that you already got, then great. That's not something that we're going to be able to do here, but it's something that some other communities that are much already have a lot of higher density build up, places like Cambridge and Somerville and stuff like that. It'll be easier for them to amend existing zoning districts or existing overlays to meet 3A requirements.
Yeah, in Nahant's case, the 3A zoning will be higher density than what's there because it's very low density zoning what's there now.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Well,
Is that true? I mean, that doesn't sound right. I mean, we have Bass Point Apartments with 120 units. Is that not meet our three? Would that not meet a 3A zoning if we rezoned it?
No, we're talking about zoning districts. So in Nahant, the zoning is allowing single family homes and 2-family homes only.
Yeah, but we have a de facto, a lot of, you just said we wouldn't be able to amend our zoning to account for existing density. I mean, 30% of the town is multifamily.
Yeah, so those areas of the town are what we refer to in zoning and planning as non-conforming. So they're multifamily that were built before zoning came into place. So they don't conform to current zoning regulations. But that's why it makes sense to look at those areas when you're talking about creating a multifamily zoning district, because what currently exists there, the actual buildings, not the regulations, but the actual buildings that exist there are much more in line with multifamily. So that's why when you're thinking about where to allow multifamily through zoning, you want to look at areas where there is existing multifamily because it more so fits in with what's there.
Okay, but a zoning change is a civic decision of the whole body politic and does not require consent of the existing owners, right?
No, it doesn't. But when you're trying to actually work to realize a housing development, you want to have conversations with those owners to see if they would even be interested in doing something. And basically, as a town government, you're telling a private property owner that we'll allow you to do more with your property than what's currently allowed now under the zoning regulations.
Right. I mean, the zoning is fairly heavily directed in favor of existing single family large lots, and the direction of 3A is to go against that. And that's a civic decision. And if somebody owns a parcel that is currently zoned for single family only and suddenly gets zoning that allows him to develop it more densely, that's probably a benefit to that owner, correct?
There's a benefit to that owner, but any zoning change has to be approved at town meeting. So yes, it's a whole democratic process that has to occur before that private property owner would have those options. But our role here in creating a plan is to say, based on these goals, to create more housing options, as we understand are very much needed for many different reasons, as we've discussed throughout the process. How do we think we should encourage that kind of expansion of the housing stock? But we're still at a very much a high level here, and for anything to actually happen in terms of a zoning change, that's got to go through, that's got to be passed at town meeting. So we'll be focusing on that as we continue to assist you in the process, but right now we're kind of at a high level.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, could I just make a few more comments if I could? Yeah, I mean, I think the exclusion of Bass Point Apartments and Edge Hill, what I said last week was essentially the effect, well, why wouldn't we change our zoning to reflect what's already there? I mean, it does make it easier to rebuild. It makes it more likely that affordable housing would be included if there was a rebuild. So, I think it does make sense for us to rezone to reflect existing density. if nothing more, just to align our zoning with what the reality of some of these areas are.
In other words, what would be the harm in doing just what Patrick said?
Yeah, no, that's why we have the areas of 3A interest outlined in purple. But we haven't removed that. I know there's not a purple circle by Bass Points. I think there should be. But what we're saying is that it's not an actual development opportunity site, because it's basically like, you see where the Edge Hill apartments are. We don't
Sure,
have
sure.
that property outlined as an actual development opportunity, because we know that at least in the near future, that's not going to redevelop. We can all agree.
Yeah, no, well, it may be a target for acquisition by the town. I could see the town buying Edge Hill apartments and converting some into affordable housing. That could certainly be on the table. Same with Bass Point, quite frankly.
So I think like for both of them should be thought of similarly. You have K as an actual development opportunity.
Yeah.
And you have existing multifamily that's near there that you might want to look at if you wanted to do a 3A zone on K and then make it a true zoning district that included more than just one parcel. And then you'd be thinking about the same thing over on G and H, where those could potentially be development opportunities. And if you wanted to expand that as a true zoning district, you may be looking into Bass Point because.
Okay, so this map is purely HPP development areas. It's not.
No, the
3A.
The green are ones that we're saying would potentially make sense for both the development opportunity to be identified in the HPP, as well as potentially included in a 3A zoning district. The purple circles are just areas that we've noted where there's existing multifamily, where if you did a multifamily zoning district, you'd be, making the regulations more in line with what's there.
Okay.
So I think, like I said, we should have a circle over by Bass Points, but we're not saying, but we don't really see that site as a real development opportunity.
Right, of course.
Just the same that we don't see Edge Hill Apartments as a real development opportunity.
Right.
Yeah, and in the same way, we're not saying that we would necessarily exclude Bass Point from 3A, but we don't want to look at this and say, well, this is already there and it's just the one parcel, so we can just, zone that and call it a day. We want to make sure that we're doing things that will actually meet the housing needs of the Nahanters for today and in the future. So we want to give a lot of special attention to these other potential development sites, see what we can eliminate here today, see what would need some further study, and try to refine this list a little bit more.
Okay.
I've got a quick question. We touched on it last week briefly, but whether it addresses 3A, 40B or not, but the two publicly owned parcels of property on Spring Road and Emerald Road that are currently affordable housing units. They're duplex units, and they contribute to a 40B threshold. But could they be considered for redevelopment, or could they be considered for zoning under 3A?
If there's an area where there's existing affordable housing, but it's very low density.
Yes.
But the site would allow for higher density, and you could look at, utilizing publicly owned land to get more affordable housing. In these processes that comes up and we evaluate that, but it is in our thought process really only worth doing that if you're going to get significantly more affordable housing units, and you're going to ensure anybody who's currently in an affordable unit is going to be in a better, new, improved unit, because we never want to, as we're trying to meet housing need through development opportunities, we don't ever want to displace a resident. And if we feel that an affordable housing area would make sense to be redeveloped, then we want to make sure that whatever's there is going to be much more impactful than what currently exists. And whoever's there gets to realize that as a better housing option in the future.
That's what I understood Mark to have in mind, that there's currently town-owned dwellings on those spaces, but they're not particularly dense or efficient, and they would be a site that, when one provided, if you will, swing space for the current residents, you could demolish them and build to much more modern standards with greater density.
Yeah, and it's a great way to upgrade housing units that are not maintained now, because a lot of public housing was built so long ago. And to get more housing units, but you just want to make sure that who lives there now has the ability to find housing in the meantime, and that they will be able to return to a new and improved unit. But where is
Those are fair enough. Those are practical
So,
constraints.
Alex,
Those are,
it's Michelle. So let's, if we want to identify, so he knows where to identify those, see where there's letter C,
yeah,
scroll down. Keep going down. You'll see a rectangle box with 4 house lots on it to the right.
down the road. Yep.
this,
Yeah, I
Going
see
right
it. Yeah,
there.
there's.
okay.
That's it. Those are duplexes side by side that's owned by the town and managed by the Nahant Housing Authority. So Mark, I
Okay.
think that's what you're talking about.
And further down,
Modernize.
right?
Yes, and
No.
above too.
And around the corner, down to the right, further to the right, and around the corner.
Yes.
Yeah.
So like any property that's owned by an entity, that would require something that the housing authority would have to think would make sense, and that they would want to partner with the town to do that. But that's similar to really any other property that's either that would be, say, privately owned, because you'd be working with that property owner to see if they want to do something. At the end of the day, the property owner is going to do what they think is best, but we're trying to think about like opportunities and partnering with that property owner to see what's possible there. But
Right, but to take the 3A analysis for the moment, what would be the harm in including those areas in the color coding, if you will, to designate them as 3A candidates? I can't not think of any harm to anybody in doing that.
yeah, well, what do you think of sites C and D? Because those are pretty close by, and maybe you're looking at a 3A district in that whole little intersection.
Well, we can return to that, but can you answer my question with regard to the properties that Mark just brought up?
Yeah, well, there wouldn't be any harm, but we wouldn't put a 3A district, I think we'd have to be looking at a little bit of a bigger area than just one parcel for a 3A district, and that's why I brought up C and D.
Well, but fair enough, we could include, areas, parts of C and D, that's great. But there's, I think, 6
It's
sites, 8.
So there's 4 buildings and 8 units on that site.
Yeah, but there's more than that.
Yeah, there's more.
I'm pulling it up on Google Maps right now.
Yeah,
1,
no,
2,
Michelle, there's
4
some private housing, and then there's some more down the road. It's
Oh,
disconnected.
yes,
what-
you have more public housing down the road on the other side. You're absolutely right. There's 3
The
more.
point is, whatever it is, first of all, it's more than one unit. There's several lots. And so I'm hard pressed to see a downside to designating those as being a target for 3A inclusion. Even if it
Yeah,
turns
no,
out to be,
this is the first time it's come to our attention, so thank you for raising that, and we will look at it. And it's, from what it sounds like, it seems like it's something that we could put up for public input like the other sites. So we'll take a look at that. But Kelly, Kelsey.
Yeah, hi. I'm a resident and I live in the area near Spring Road, and I'm just participating today because I saw it available to residents. I have concerns about the number of housing we're suggesting in the area. I think it does impact the neighborhood. It makes it more of a transient neighborhood. So I think I just want to speak out for the residents in the area, because it seems like we're targeting one area and there's a lot of places within Nahant beyond the Spring Road area.
So Kelsey, this is Michelle Capano. I'm chair of the committee. So thanks for the feedback. We have an opportunity later in the meeting for public comment. So right now, this is the working meeting for the committee. So we want to get through the topics that we have, but we'll certainly open it up for public comment as we get further along.
Thank you.
You're welcome. John and Alex, why don't you take it back?
Okay, so just to come to some decision points, and remember, all of this is just to say, like, what do we think is appropriate based on the analysis so far, that we then want to put out to the public to see, what their input is, and that's all going to help us make decisions to ultimately make a recommendation in a plan. Doesn't mean actually going to be developed, but it's where we see there could be opportunities for us to use the tools that we have to work with partners, work with private property owners to give them more options with how they might like to use their land. But moving forward, what we want to do is make a couple decisions, and I just want to confirm a couple. So it looks like if I recall, everyone's in agreement to take J off because of lots of development constraints associated with that one. We don't see Bass Points as a site as a development opportunity, but it could make sense for 3A zoning. It sounds like everybody was in agreement with that. Other sites, we said we took off the dump site because of severe development constraints. I didn't hear any complaints about that, so I think we can confirm that. I think some of the outstanding things are, I know there's some conversations about the 2 properties near the church. I want to hear a little more about that. And then the 2 that really, like, I'm not sure whether we want to keep them or not and warrant more conversation are C and D, because these both, D had, at least on the map, some wetlands concerns, and both of them are in the floodplain. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean they can't be development opportunities, but it's something that will make development there a little more difficult. There's some extra steps that a developer or property owner would have to take. But let's start with that, and then let's end on the church property. So what is the thoughts on D and C? Do we see, let's start with D. This showed wetlands on the map. From your knowledge, do you see that as a huge constraint? Do you see there's some potential opportunity here? What is everyone's thoughts on D?
Would someone please describe what I have trouble seeing on my screen, the outlines here. So describe what C is.
This is
I'm Nahant.
Sorry.
Michelle,
Oh.
where is C?
Located off Spring. So that's right next to it's
It's a
Seems to be
compost
ne-
pit.
basketball court? No, it's not the basketball court.
No, it's
Yes.
opposite that.
Next, hold on, I'm just looking to see where it is.
It's to the southwest of Mitchell's Corner. So I
Yes,
think
I'm just looking
that's where the Heritage Trail goes into the
Yes,
into the not the thicket, but on the way to the
No. That's the entrance of the compost area.
that's what I thought. Okay, it was the compost area. Okay.
Okay, so that's C.
no. The compost area is C. I thought Jim was
Yeah.
asking about D.
No,
No.
we were talking about C.
I
C is the
apologize.
compost area.
Okay,
And then D is directly across from the fire station. There's a right of way that goes straight back behind Dennis Ball's house. And that's the location. I believe that's that next sec. That's where D is.
all right. Okay, thank you.
Actually, the fire station is where the road turns and runs directly east-west. That's at the base of Fox Hill Road, right?
I gotta just change my map view. Hold on.
So this is just a couple of houses over from Mitchell's Corner, D is. And I think it is the area that includes that trail, that nature trail.
I'm trying to pick the nature trail.
It's part of it. It's the back of Vicky's house.
Oh, okay. Then that, I was just trying to think between Justin, Vicky, and that location. So yeah, now I know.
So, I mean, we're discounting J because it's in the flood zone. It has severe wetlands. D is also in the flood zone, has wetlands. So I really think there is a logical reason to potentially take that one off unless anyone has a really good reason to keep it on.
No,
Okay, so why don't we take D off? Can you make a note of that, John? Now what about C? It's not, doesn't have a wetland overlay, and it's a little bit, you know, to the right. It is a publicly owned property, so it is valuable in the sense that the town could decide, you know, exactly what would happen there. They wouldn't have to work with a private property owner. You could work with a development partner and really spell out what it is. It's a pretty good size. It is also in the floodplain though.
Is that the basketball court now we're talking about?
yes,
Yeah, okay.
So what's everyone's thoughts about C 35 Spring Road?
I mean,
I
if
mean,
we
I
can
don't-
develop it to something, I think it makes sense.
I mean, I don't see any problem with leaving all of these on there. It's really a matter of discussion, right? And if we don't leave it on, people are gonna bring it up. So we might as well leave them there. Identify what the constraints are, and how they stack up to other sites, but I mean, there are sites that to be considered.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So we want
And at the end of the day, whether something goes up there is largely going to be a product of the interest in the economic analysis that some developer makes, right?
Right, exactly.
so you want to keep C and D.
Yeah.
What if but we still want to take J off, it sounds like.
Yeah, that's, I mean, that's at the very end of Pond Street and it's it's
It's
100%
Pond,
wetland.
it's a phony street that's the Pond Street extended, right?
Yeah,
Pond Street goes right down to the golf course on paper.
Right.
On paper, well, all right, it's a paper road, there's no paving, no improvement, right?
Correct.
correct.
Okay, from just, you know, you seeing all the constraints maps, the flooding maps, the wetland maps, the protected open space, all the maps. Is there any other sites on here? And when I say sites, they're actually like the parcels outlined, not the circles that just show areas where there's existing multifamily. But is there any sites on here that you think, after we've looked at the constraints maps, no longer makes sense and should be removed before public input's collected?
One question, why is F limited to the 40B and HPP opportunity sites? Why is it not considered as a
Yes.
3A site?
That's a good question. We are recommending that just as an HPP site because there's already a development agreement approved at town hall. And as you'll see in one of the future recommendations that we're going to get to later tonight, we're going to be looking at that to see if it would make sense to explore the possibility of updating the development agreement. But considering that there's a development agreement there, or we might want to have a different development agreement there, then we don't need to be thinking about offering an opportunity through 3A zoning because we are, you know, very specific on the kind of development that we're working towards on that site. Whereas other ones, you know, it may not be a development agreement. It may be something that you want to allow the private property owner an option to use 3A zoning to do their through a permitting process or something else.
What do you mean by development agreement?
Well, it's a publicly owned property that has been approved for sale based on a development agreement where you're working with whoever would buy that property to come to agreement specifically on the development that would be there. So it's
I don't think that's quite accurate. The selectmen have been enabled to sell the property. It doesn't, not required to, they're not engaged that I know of with any developer. It's just a question of their being enabled to sell the property.
And you all are recommending that designation, that arrangement be reconsidered further down our agenda tonight, right?
We are. We're recommending, and we'll get there. I don't want to clog up the rest of this conversation because we should really, focus on it. But yes, we are going to discuss that about pursuing an actual development agreement there as a part of the sale. So like at
Okay.
the time that it would be sold. I understand that it hasn't been sold, and I understand that there's just been an authorization to sell it. But I understood through conversations that there was some development agreements in that were being proposed and planned. Is that right?
I wouldn't describe it as a development agreement.
Right, like not the actual agreement, but the groundwork for one.
Yes. I think that's fair.
Okay, but since nothing is in hard concrete, then I suggest we continue to consider the Coast Guard as for 3A, at least for these purposes, till a decision is made that makes it ineligible for one reason or another.
I agree with that, Mike.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that.
Well, I'm not here to have disagreements with you all, but I'm actually thinking it through now. And I think, it may not make the most sense to really have any kind of publicly owned land as 3A if your intention is to partner with a developer to do a development agreement on publicly owned land. When you're talking about a zoning regulation, you are enabling a private property owner to do something different with a different regulation. But if it's publicly owned land and the intention is to work with a development partner and come to an agreement on exactly how that land will be developed, then you don't need a zoning regulation to make that happen. It's the town's land, and the town can actually have a lot more leverage over deciding exactly what happens there. And so that's why I am thinking that it would make more sense to have it as an HPP site, because from our conversations in the process so far, it sounds like the most likely scenario for that is in a development agreement as a publicly owned property that would potentially be sold. And that could be the case for other publicly owned properties as well. So with that said, what are your all thoughts about it?
Just
I
straight-
I disagree with you, Alex.
Okay,
If it's zoned as, the way it's zoned, when you say the public, the Board of Selectmen don't have the right to change that zoning unilaterally. I mean, they would have to go back to town meeting.
okay, so that's why you think it would make sense to have it as 3A and a site.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
And once again, I don't see any downside in including some area for 3A consideration, because nobody's ox is gored. It doesn't constrain anybody and provides possibly a greater value for somebody, either a current owner, future interim owner, a future final owner.
Okay. John, did you have any thoughts on that from a technical standpoint?
I think that my biggest concern is that there needs to be some consideration to the reasonable to size determination in the 3A guidelines. So what this says is that and what you guys are adjacent small towns. So there's no minimum land area for an adjacent small town, and in these communities, the multifamily zoning district may comprise as many or as few acres as the community determines is appropriate, as long as it meets the minimum multifamily unit capacity and the gross density requirements. So what I'm worried about is if we end up in a situation where we're not able to meet density requirements with that small of a parcel, and if we need to do anything that will kind of change the way that this looks. So any district, even though we don't have a set size, the minimum requirements should still be should still be considered here. So I'm worried that we're going to end up in a situation where it's going to be, number one, challenging to figure out the density on a site this small, and number two, we know there's been lots of conversations around wanting to use a part of this parcel for a senior housing development, and that's the kind of thing that would not exactly be, it doesn't jive exactly with 3A. So there's some other concerns with that as well. So I think that it's something that we can consider and recognize that there's some additional challenges there. So,
John, may I ask, you're saying
Yeah.
that senior housing would not be countable toward a 3A development?
well, 3A
Yeah,
development, yes,
It has to be, the zoning has to allow housing that's suitable for families. So if that housing, if it's age restricted, then there's a conflict.
yeah, and typically senior-only developments are going to be much smaller. Efficiency units are 1 bedroom, and the idea behind 3A is that they would be larger multifamily units. So typically at least 2 bedroom. And so when you're looking at that, it kind of changes how we think about the size of the buildings that would be constructed and what that density actually looks like as far as units per acre, if the size of the units needs to be a little bit larger than what we might be thinking. So I think that there's some challenges with that site. And if we wanted to look at that part of the Coast Guard site and say we want to build senior housing there, you could do so even if it's zoned for 3A, but the goals are at odds with each other. They're not exactly the same thing. And from our earliest conversations with the town, we were led to believe that that second part of the parcel, and I know it looks like 2 parcels, technically it's 1 parcel in 2 parts, would make the most sense for a senior housing development in Nahant.
So you have
Right.
to keep in mind too that any of these sites can be just developed through a comprehensive permitting process, but irregardless of zoning. So
I don't recall any particular discussion of constraints associated with senior housing that we've really discussed before.
yeah, I mean, that was something that was touched on in our last meeting in terms of like what you're allowed to zone for in 3A and what you're not allowed to zone for. The zoning regulations would not allow, the zoning would not be compliant with 3A regulations if it was saying that only age restricted housing could go there. Because
Okay, but you could zone it as 3A and put senior housing if you wanted.
Right.
if the zoning regulations didn't say that it had to be age restricted, then yes, you could zone it for 3A.
Okay.
But again, just, since like you can use the 40B comprehensive permitting process to facilitate a development regardless of what the zoning is. And so then it's again, like if you envision a site as something more where you might want to partner with a developer and say, hey, we'll, as a town, lease you this land or sell you this land at a lower than market cost on the condition that you're going to do this in your development. You're going to build the way that we are agreeing to in this agreement. You could facilitate that development through the 40B process, regardless of what the zoning is.
That would be a friendly 40B.
Right. So you know what? It's a lot to think about. Let's keep in mind that 3A is still like later in this process. So I'm going to tend to agree with you that it doesn't hurt to keep that in play at this point, and we may come to a decision later that it doesn't make sense for 3A, and it's something that we, after all of our discussions we're having and all the public input we're going to gather, that we see it as more of we would want to have more control over what happens, or we would want to do a development agreement in a friendly 40B there, not a zoning district.
Yeah, I was just going to agree with that. I think if we had to make a choice right now, I think HPP would make more sense there, but might as well just keep 3A on the table.
Okay, well, I think this has been a really good start to the conversation. And again, we're still in the middle of this process. we're literally just deciding what we think from a technical standpoint, and as Nahant experts, like the committee is made up of, what we want to ask the public about. And then we're going to collect the public's thoughts on all of this and then return to this discussion and have, several more discussions before these recommendations end up in the plan. So we're still in the middle of this process. We're simply looking at this from a planning standpoint, from a standpoint of having all of the insights that are represented from Nahant on this committee to say what makes sense to ask the public about. And so do we feel good with putting these forward for public comment?
Yes, but I
Yes,
think
I think
the
it's just
context,
options.
the context, I mean, the geography, I think we're all in pretty good shape about, is my sense. But I think the way in which the public is presented, it matters in terms of how it's explained to the public, what our range of options is with regard to these things. Because this stuff is capable of being mind-numbingly complex, and if we confuse the public, who have spent far less time than we have in sorting this stuff out, we're not going to get useful feedback. So I think we need to be very careful in terms of what they're told is the significance of these areas and what our range of options is with regard to each one.
Absolutely.
So Mike, for these, are you suggesting we have some type of upfront prompt in the virtual open house that helps further educate the distinction between the HPP opportunity sites only and then the HPP opportunity sites and potential 3A sites? And why, there's obviously could be pros and cons to each of them.
Right. I think, first of all, I think that it's important to have placards or some sort of explanation that the people understand what is the significance of 40B development. In other words, what's the town's options with respect to that? It's related, but it's different in 3A. I think they need to be explained in, if you will, two separate placards in very simple and clear terms, so that people can get a grasp of it and also get a grasp of the significance of, let's say, town-owned land like parcel E, as opposed to parcel K, which is the country club, and parcel F, so that they have an understanding of what it being town-owned versus privately owned does, and what our options are with respect to each.
Yeah, I think that's really the key thing, Mike, is because if it's publicly owned, the town actually can have a much more direct role in determining more specifically what would happen there or not happen there. If it's privately owned, the town really is just considering working with that developer to say, would you like to do something here? How can we support you? Or to change the regulations to say, we're going to allow you to do more here than what you're currently allowed, because through this planning process, this was identified as an opportunity.
Well, but there's also another option. I guess you guys were not on the call when we discussed it last week, but there is the possibility of eminent domain taking an interest in a particular private parcel that would have the effect of making it deed restricted, so that it could function as a 40B site.
Well, some of the properties the town could see in this plan and say, do we want to acquire that either by buying it, or if it was possible to do eminent domain? But as I said before, that's more of an implementation thing that I would think would be in the purview of the town and not really for us to say in a plan.
Well, obviously, we don't have the final decision on anything. This is a plan.
Right.
So we're discussing options, and the option is what the option is, regardless of who's the decision maker on it. Some decision will be made by the selectmen, some decisions by private developers, and some potentially by town meeting. So yes, it's going to be other people who make the decision, but to the extent that we're talking about a plan and presenting options to the townspeople, I think we need to consider that that is an option.
Well, there has to be specific criteria met for eminent domain, and I'm not sure that any of these private properties would meet that criteria, but if that's something you'd like us to look at, we can.
It seems to me unrealistic to rule it out.
Right.
Well, I guess I only add, what we talked about, Alex, quite a bit last time was a housing trust.
Right.
Affordable housing trust, and I think that's the vehicle in which that, if it eminent domain or taking of anything like that, would go through something like an affordable housing trust. So I would hope that the housing production plan could take a look at the benefits of an affordable housing trust and whether or not that is something that would be useful for the town of Nahant.
I thought we were pretty much in agreement that it would be useful, especially to deal with tax delinquent properties.
Well, I agree with you, Mike. I'm just hoping that through this process with our plan, that's something that MAPC will include in their housing production plan as a recommendation.
Right. Right.
This is Christian. I'm eating dinner, so I'm gonna keep myself off camera. Sorry about that. But I just thought I would chime in. I mentioned this in the chat, but certainly, Mike, the thing that you mentioned about sort of like making sure that the public has the right background information and knowledge to be able to make decisions, we can include that in the online open house. We would want to do that anyway. Like I mentioned, where we wanted to include background information, we can certainly make sure that the information that helps people understand like what they're actually being asked about is in the online open house. And that way, you know, like theoretically that information would also be part of the forum in June. But the online open house is I think a really great place to make sure that to provide that so that people can kind of explore it at on their own time.
Fair enough. I mean, for example, with regard to the country club, you know, the some of the explanation that would be presented to the public, either in a pop-up, if they hover over it with a mouse, or on a placard, and, you know, would be, okay, this is a big piece of open space. It is privately owned, but it's owned by an unusual entity. It is not currently available to the town. The town would have options to negotiate with the owner for possible partition or acquisition of some or all of it, or would have other opportunities to, you know, legal opportunities to gain control of the land pending or on if town meeting so approved, something like that. And that sort of explanation, I think, would be involved in virtually all of these parcels. People need to understand, you know, who owns it, and in light of that, what are the opportunities? What's the significance of proximity of wetlands and so forth, so that they have the full picture as we've distilled it from these discussions that would allow them to consider each parcel of land. Another thing with respect to the country club, to the extent it came to be used, needs to be pointed out that, you know, it might be that using just a parcel of that land, let's say the frontage along Nahant Road, would be sufficient, coupled with a few other parcels, to satisfy our 40B threshold to make us bulletproof from hostile 40Bs.
I know, Alex, you're about to add something. I have to hop off shortly, so I just wanted to mention that we definitely can include whatever information, you know, like I'll defer to Alex and John about what information about the parcels makes, and all of you, what information about the parcels makes sense to include in the social pinpoint. But, you know, like I was saying earlier, we certainly can include background information about the property that helps people make those decisions in the social pinpoint. We also can include like overlays that are on the map that people can turn on and off. John and I are going to think about how to do this on Monday, but we can include overlays in the map that people can turn on and off that show wetlands, that show open space, so that way they can sort of get a better sense of like where the wetlands in the area are. And because we already have those things developed, we can just add them to the social pinpoint without having to do extra work.
Yeah, we'll include the most pertinent information that will
Yeah.
help people make their decisions, and we will certainly have prompts to explain, you know, basically what it means for a private or a publicly owned site to be identified in a plan. There was some conversation about affordable housing trust and some other things that I think are getting into the recommendation. So I'm going to propose that we move forward into that discussion, as a lot of things that you're talking about are discussed there. Is that okay with everyone if we move on to that?
Just before we do, I want to make sure that the only thing that we're for sure removing is the Country Club West Site J, and I haven't heard anybody else say that there are things that they concretely want to remove. So if that's the case, that'll be the one that we take off and move the discussion forward with the rest of the sites. Everybody
Before
good
we
with
take
that?
the discussion, John, wait 1 second. So all of this is Big Nahant.
Yes.
Little Nahant is not, I wouldn't say out of scope, but I mean, I don't know for the committee. I mean, I can only think of one property in Little Nahant that's available, but I don't know if we want to put it on the map and have residents consider it.
Which one?
It's a piece of property where there was a fire on Wilson Road, and then it was gifted to Habitat to Humanity, who attempted to try to build but was not able to. But it's still, you know, an open lot. It would need, you know, rezoning, but could be an opportunity to put a single family home, you know, and it could be an affordable, you know, affordable opportunity for a developer. Not sure if we want to consider it. We can, you know, we can talk about it again in another meeting, but
Yeah, I was unaware of it, so good.
Yeah.
work.
Basically,
I mean, we just don't
yeah,
have Little Nahant represented, so, and it's all, this is all Big Nahant, so I just want to make sure that, you know, we're exhausting everything possible. And if there's something else in Little Nahant that we should consider, I'm happy to look at it.
Mhm.
I think, you know, the point about Little Nahant and Big Nahant is a good one, but really regardless of that, from what you've described on that site, that there was a permit that expired, and basically the property owner, which is Habitat for Humanity, can't do anything with the property. So it, to me, makes a lot of sense to put it into the plan for the town to think about what they would want to do there and allow the property owner to do something different.
That property was since been acquired by a neighbor,
Okay.
an adjacent neighbor.
Hmm.
May not
Is-
matter, but just an update.
Yeah.
It's important to
The
know.
how-
Thank you.
They didn't get their permits to build, did they, Mike?
No, they applied for a permission and didn't get it.
Okay,
Mhm.
So
so,
basically, they can't do anything with that property. So I think that it would make sense for it to be identified as something where the town might want to work with that property owner, basically.
Should the Howe estate be part of this conversation?
I mean, that's going through a final sale. We don't know what the developer, I mean, there's options the developer might have for that. We can add it. It may result in changing zoning to give them more flexibility if they were to do something with affordable housing scope.
I wouldn't add that at this point.
Okay,
No? No?
Yeah, I
Okay.
think we're just a little too far along,
okay,
and we've already got a lot of really great opportunities that we've worked on, I think. So
okay. So
with
let's move
this here,
forward.
which I expect to be refined after public input, we have plenty to work with in terms of 40B and 3A goals. All right, well, with that, everybody want to get up and stretch maybe before the next session, because it's gonna be another big one.
Pretty good. Let's get going.
Keep
All right.
going.
So let's get into it. HPP goals and strategies. So, we have been working on this planning process for a little over 6 months now. We've done a housing needs assessment that really documented all the various housing needs and preferences of Nahanters. We have all the key findings from that. We had our public forum where we presented that information to the public. We gathered input from residents about their own experiences to learn more, collected all of that input, analyzed all of it, and all of that summarized in the packet that you have that Michelle sent over. And based on that, we established some goals at the April committee meeting that were presented after we really talked about what we learned at the forum and everything, and the committee endorsed those goals. So from that point, MAPC has drafted some recommendations that are basically strategies that work towards achieving those goals. This is still the beginning stages. This is still the first time that we are going to discuss these with you. It is very much at an outline level, so there are a lot of details to come. But what we want to do at this point is similar to what we were doing with development opportunities, to say, what do we think really makes sense that we are comfortable bringing to the second forum, and as a committee saying, these are some proposed strategies and we want to hear what you think about it. We want to get your ideas on it. So at this point, we're really thinking about what makes sense. If there's anything that doesn't make sense or we have concerns about, we want to discuss that, because then we wouldn't want to propose that at the public forum in June. Now, this is all going to get narrowed down as we move forward, and the final recommendations that make their way into the plan. At that point, we would then be looking at action steps, like this is how we're going to implement this recommendation. These are the entities that are going to be responsible for implementing it. And these are the resources that are going to be required to do that. That's all to come. Right now, we're at a kind of an outline level of what do we want to focus on, so that we can put our time into actually building out the details on the recommendation. So a recap of the HPP goals, and there was a slight update here since April, which I'll clarify in a moment, but this was again based on all of the analysis and input to date to, one, expand little to middle housing options. So, the majority of housing options available to Nahanters at this point, really about 73% of housing in town is larger single family homes, and those are important, but to have a greater variety of housing types is also important, because you have seniors, a lot of aging folks in Nahant who may be looking for a downsizing option. Not as many of those exist as there could be. At the same time, there's younger folks who are looking for a smaller housing option that's more attainable to buy, like to buy their first home and stay in the town that they grew up in. So expanding the variety of different types of homes in town is going to build those options for aging folks, younger folks, and really everyone in between. The second goal is understanding that even when we have a variety of housing types in the marketplace, this is such an expensive area that it's just not going to be affordable for a lot of folks. Not a lot of people know, but if you're a single person household, you earn up to $78,000, you're eligible for affordable housing. And if you're a larger family, that eligibility limit is even higher. So the second goal that we have established is to create more options that are affordable, that are required to be affordable and aren't going to change with the market. The third is looking at what we know in terms of a lot of folks having trouble affording the very expensive housing in Nahant. This is something that we saw through our data and the input we collected at the forum. That's a really big issue for seniors, as well as individuals who live alone. the cost of housing is disproportionately higher for them. It's more difficult for them to afford housing. And we've also been talking about blue collar workers, veterans, all the different folks who may be facing housing instability. And so we're talking about a goal to improve housing stability for those folks and those who are vulnerable to things that may compel them to have to go out of Nahant, which we don't want to see. Then the last one is to look at harmonizing all of this work around building housing opportunity with sustainability goals, to build neighborhoods, to make sure that we have public open space, that there's a relationship between those two things, and so that housing can really be in line with the town's sustainability goals. I'm going to note that we at one point had a goal to support first-time home ownership. We have since taken that as a strategy, and the reason is goals are big overarching visions that drive forward several other things in the plan. So you should be able to have several strategies that would fall under a goal, or a strategy should be able to work towards several goals. So in terms of supporting first-time home ownership, there are ways to do that, but it's really more of a strategy than a goal. So it was a little bit of a reorganization. I think it'll make more sense when you see the strategy to support first-time home buyers. So just to be clear, that's still a central point of the recommendations in this plan. It's just been organized as a strategy rather than a goal. Any questions about that before we look at the strategies that pertain to these goals?
Yes, on number 2.
Yeah.
Is that when you say uppercase affordable housing, are you talking about subsidized housing?
Housing
Or I should say,
Yes.
deed restricted.
Yes, it's housing that's deed restricted, so it's only accessible to income eligible households, and it is required by a deed restriction to cost no more than 30% of their income.
Okay, and that kind of housing would usually be owned by a public entity or a nonprofit, right?
Not always. Developers
Usually, the word was usually.
Not even usually. I mean, if you have a friendly 40B or another type of 40B, 25% of that are deed restricted affordable housing, and the other 75% are market rate. You could have affordability requirements where you make a private developer build a percent of affordable housing. And I actually would say that that type of affordable housing is more common than what I would categorize as public housing, which would be like what's owned by the Nahant Housing Authority.
So in effect, Jim, it is subsidized, but it's subsidized by the private landowner pursuant to an agreement that's embedded in the deed.
It could be either, yeah.
Yeah, okay, just wanted to clarify that. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. All right, so that's something that we're all very familiar with because we discussed it at our last meeting and we endorsed those goals. So based on these goals that we established, MAPC is proposing some recommended strategies that work to achieve these goals at an outline level. And again, what we're trying to come away with tonight is, do these make sense? Do we want to ask the public for their ideas about these strategies? So the way that this has been organized is in a chart. Up top in the blue, dark blue area, you see the 4 goals in shorthand, the little to middle housing option. So having a variety of housing types, the affordable housing, which we just talked about, housing stability programs to help people afford the existing housing here, and sustainability to make sure that housing goals are harmonized with sustainability goals. These strategies that we're going to be going over, some of them work towards multiple goals. So the first one, which, hey, Mark, you're talking about establishing affordable housing trust. That's one of the first recommended strategies. That would work towards creating more affordable housing, and it could also provide funding mechanisms for things that could help people afford housing here and increase housing stability. So it works towards 2 goals. The second one, as you can see, actually works towards all 4. So that's
Let me go back to the first one, affordable housing trust. Since the town currently sets aside 10% of CPA funds for affordable housing, I think it should be noted that we have the liberty to allocate as much as 70% of CPA funds for that purpose.
Yes. So are
Yeah,
you
but like, it's not, we're not gonna increase the 10% threshold. That's already been established.
By whom?
That's been discussed previously through CPC. Those thresholds are already there. I don't think there's gonna be, I think that would be a challenge to increase the 10% for the affordable housing.
Well, maybe, but Lynn
I
was
don't
on the,
think that. Let me just say, what we're talking about is what could happen, not what.
Right.
We're required to have 10%. And there are 4 requirements. So you could have 70% in housing if that choice was made. And I thought that Lynn had said at the last meeting that it's certainly possible to increase the percentage according to the committee's desires.
I think
mean,
the
this is,
operative word is at least,
This is
so.
a good example of a detail that I think will need to be sorted out in our process and really needs to consider a lot of different complexities that involved the town administration, town finances, the community preservation committee. I mean, ultimately, if through our discussions and input that we collect from the public, we think that we may want to recommend an increase, that's fine. But I don't think that we should get into the specifics of it now. And even when it is a recommendation, it's hard to say exactly how much without us being intimately familiar with the town's finances and how everything's working. But really, this recommendation, even if there wasn't an increase in how much was dedicated to affordable housing, is still an important one, because what we're talking about is establishing a trust so that those funds are put into a special area where they're guaranteed to be used for housing initiatives, and they can be used quickly and nimbly as in a nimble fashion as opportunities arise. And it also, it's not just CPA funds that you can get once you have a trust. Once you have a trust, you could be bringing in other funds through fees that you might be looking at, through grants that you might want to say, we want to take this money and put it into the trust. At one point, if this becomes such a big priority, you could even ask at town meeting if the residents would want to put a small appropriation into it each year. So just having the trust opens the opportunity to get a lot more funding that's going to be dedicated to support your initiatives here around housing. The CPA is just one of those funding streams, and right now, you definitely want to put what's currently allocated for a CPA.
why don't we just have it say the town is obliged to set aside at least 10% of CPA funds?
Right, which is the fact.
I have no problem with that.
Okay.
I mean, all the other sources are true. They're not, there are too many to recount and adds too much complexity, but okay, thank you.
Alex, as we go through these strategies, these are not mutually exclusive of one another, right?
A lot of them are related to each other, and there's another one that's gonna come up later that is related to this.
Okay.
So the second one, and by the way, these first couple are really designed to build capacity, understanding that as a small town with limited resources, that's something that we need to focus on to actually make a difference and move the needle here. So this second one is really about building staff capacity. And there are communities out here in the region that partner together and they share a consultant planner that can help them with certain things based on how the demand changes each year. And that's a really cost-effective way to build your staffing capacity. So basically what we're talking about here is having a part-time consultant that you would be hiring on demand. So say, you have something complicated going on with maybe you're looking at partnering with a developer on a specific site and you need support with that, then, you would work with this consultant specifically there. But doing this in a cost-effective way and not having a permanent planner, but a consultant that you could hire on demand. You could do that just in your own capacity as a town, or you could enter into an agreement with other communities that have similar needs, other towns and cities, and you could all share one. And that's called a shared housing service office. Since, I think at this point, you probably wouldn't have a lot of demand. It would probably make more sense to do this just directly with a consultant. But again, those sorts of details could be discussed further as we move along, but I really think it's important to build that staffing capacity.
Alex, I don't want to get into the minutia here, the details, but I mean, all of that can be done through the Affordable Housing Trust, right? As the administrative wing of all of this.
Well, it's a good point, but if your trust is just run by volunteers and they don't have a professional person to guide them, it can limit, their effectiveness and their ability.
Mark's saying that the trust could be the source of the funds to hire the part-time planner.
Correct.
Yes, that's definitely true.
Okay.
Okay,
All right, so sounds like we all understand those two. I'm gonna move forward. The next set are regulatory strategies. So these deal with the town's regulations that have to do with housing. So we're looking at zoning regulations. Throughout this entire process, accessory dwelling units have come up as both a need and an interest from residents. This is basically a way to really increase housing options with minimal impacts on neighborhoods, to really work with what is already here. This is basically something that can just allow homeowners to create an additional housing option, a smaller housing option on their property. It's really something that can help out with seniors that may want to downsize and transition for their adult children to come into the home and support each other, but still live with autonomy. So this could be a housing unit that could be separated inside your existing home. It could be attached to your existing home, and in areas where it makes sense and there's a big enough yard space, you could have a detached, small, kind of tiny home in the backyard where that makes sense. So what we are recommending here is to allow accessory dwelling units in the zoning regulations. They currently aren't allowed. We are also in the process of some mapping analysis that will help us determine where it would make most sense to allow, say, a detached ADU, because there's more, properties in this area of town have much more land and it makes more sense there. Whereas other areas, it may make more sense to allow an internal or attached ADU. In any case, we want to keep in mind that someone developing an accessory dwelling unit is not a professional developer. It could just be an everyday person like you and me. So you want to make that process as easy and as straightforward as possible. So the recommendation is to have the zoning bylaw allow this without a special permit, but with appropriate standards and criteria to make sure that this is going to be done well, that it's not going to interfere with things going on in the neighborhood, that you could do things like make sure that the ADU is screened with landscaping, all sorts of things like that to protect any potential conflicts with property owners.
So
with
Alex,
regard to,
accomplish this, the town would only have to accept the provisions of Mass General laws to do so.
Are you saying that there's like, you would need to draft, you would need to amend the town zoning bylaw to allow this, and you'd have to draft that zoning bylaw.
But that amendment to the zoning bylaw under the new provisions of Mass General laws, that doesn't require a 2/3 vote or a simple majority.
Right, now you can do it through a simple majority. It used to be where you'd have to get 2/3. You can do that through a simple majority now.
it's Brendan Crichton's legislation.
Yes, and if the town approved that to a simple majority, then ADUs would be acceptable by a matter of right.
Yes, if you are if you determine that you think a special permitting process is really needed, you could do it through special permit. We're recommending by right so that you can encourage folks to do it and not make it complicated or too difficult for say the average person to consider doing this.
But the Board of Selectmen could establish rules and regulations regarding this, right?
Yeah, you could say like, we're only going to allow ADUs to be a certain size. We're only going to allow detached ADUs in this area of town. We're only gonna allow those detached ADUs to be at a setback distance from the property owner, like those sorts of things, which are typically hashed out in a permitting process. But, you know, if you're thinking about doing this and then you're like, oh, I gotta go through this permitting process, I've gotta pay for that, I've gotta, you know,
Right.
I can't finance this now, you know, so it just, you wanna encourage people to do this, because it's only gonna help everyone.
So
with
Alice,
regard
I
to
think you're
this,
proposing,
sorry.
like, if the board of selectmen set up the regulations or the guidelines in advance, then it will be easier for people to determine, can they or can't, does it make sense for them to do an ADU on their property if there are certain guidelines in place?
Right.
That's the way it would go.
You would determine what that is, anticipating, you know, what you need to make sure, you know, that you're gonna avoid any potential issues. So like an example is, you know, require that there's sufficient parking on site, or require that there is the ADU is screened from the view by landscaping if it's a detached one.
So with regard to both this one and the next one, the small to medium-sized housing types, I'm wondering to what extent these additional units would be subject to fair housing regulations such that it would be unlawful for owners to discriminate in terms of who gets to occupy these.
Any rental units are going to be subject to fair housing regulations. Those are state and federal, and there's always exceptions and things like that. But generally speaking, any kind of housing discrimination laws would apply regardless of if it's a standard rental or an ADU or anything like that.
So
Yeah,
there's
you
no-
know,
there's
I
no-
have seen communities that will have in the bylaw that may have been written a long time ago, say, you know, only family members can live in the, or, you know, they'll limit how many bedrooms can be in a unit, and that conflicts with federal fair housing laws, because if you're saying that only a certain amount of bedrooms can be in a unit, you're saying a family can't live there. So that would be a violation of fair housing laws, because you're interfering with a protected class, which is family.
So Alex, I'm gonna interject here for just a moment. Can you unmute Patrick and unmute Jim Walsh?
Yes. I've asked you to unmute Patrick, and I've asked you to unmute Jim.
So the question is, there's no lower limit or threshold of the applicability of fair housing regulations. And if that's true, it would mean that anybody who develops an ADU or one of these small to medium-sized additional housing units on an existing lot would not be able to limit its occupancy to family members, existing Nahant people with relatives in Nahant, anything of that kind, correct?
Absolutely. You absolutely should not limit ADUs to just family members for that reason. You will see that in zoning regulations, but it is in conflict with federal fair housing laws. So make sure that when you're writing a local regulation, you are not in conflict with fair housing laws. So yes.
Can we limit these for short-term rentals?
No, I mean, you got to think about this like, you want this to add to housing options, right?
Right.
So you want this, if somebody built an ADU, you'd want them to be able to say, have their parents who are aging potentially live there. They have the option to do that, but it's not their only option, right? They could have the option to do a short-term rental as long as it aligns with your other regulations that you're looking at along with that, right? But they should have the option to do that, which could give them additional income, which could reduce their cost burden, how much cost that they have from their home. Or they can have the option to do it as a long-term rental, which creates a rental opportunity for someone in the hunt when currently there are not a lot of rental opportunities.
So then what happens after the fact? Say you have a single family home on a 10,000 square foot lot, it's 2,500 square feet, and they put an ADU that says 800 square feet. And that property decides to sell. Are they selling both properties on that home? Or are they selling? Can they sell just the larger home and not the ADU? What happens?
It's the same as anything else. So the property is deeded as one property. You don't get to
Okay.
split them off or anything like that. So what would happen is it's no different than if you were buying a multifamily building. You were not just buying the building, you were buying the leases of the tenants in that building as
Right.
well, and that would need to be honored.
So the
No, I
ADU
mean-
goes with the main house.
Yes.
So
No,
the-
people can divide lots. The limitation on that is the zoning lot size limit. If you have a big piece of land, you can certainly divide it and sell part of it. But the
That's if
requirement,
you can divide the lot into the apportioned permissible single-family homes. This is the case of a 10,000 square foot lot where you might not be able to do that. So that's why I asked the question.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
if you're dividing the lot, you're essentially no longer having an ADU because at that
Right.
point, that dwelling unit is no longer accessory. It's a principal dwelling unit on a different lot.
Yeah.
Great.
And you
Thank
all
you.
are bringing up things that I've seen in really bad ADU bylaws that you should definitely not put into yours because it doesn't make sense. There are some towns that have these kinds of stipulations like when you sell it, you can't sell it with the ADU. You got to get a permit again for the ADU.
Hmm.
It's ridiculous. You don't want to do that.
Yeah, no, I agree. Can these ADUs, if you were renting as an affordable unit, be deed restricted?
Typically, ADUs are not going to be deed restricted or count on the SHI, and that's why you see them in relation to goal 1 to create more housing options and not goal 2 to create affordable housing.
That
Okay.
being said, you guys could bake something into your ADU bylaw, which I would encourage you to take a look at, which would require that any of the rents be set with an affordability threshold to them.
But even then, it wouldn't count unless it ended up being deed, it wouldn't count on your SHI anyway, unless
Yeah.
it was deed restricted. So I think John's bringing up what they've been exploring in Salem, and it's still kind of an experiment.
So I just have a process question on this engagement. Are you guys going to be helping us craft if we decide to go ahead with this strategy, would you be as part of this HPP process helping us draft that zoning bylaw change, or how is that?
Yeah, it's a good question, but this is a plan, and we're laying out a roadmap and recommendations. So no, this isn't the kind of project where we actually draft that bylaw. That would be another project that you could do with us, you could do on your own, or you could do with a totally different consultant. But I will note that the recommendation to get a part-time consultant could be really helpful if you wanted to draft this bylaw. Like, that person should be able to help you draft the bylaw.
Right. So I guess that is the bigger question, though, then is that hold true for the other potential 3A, especially that work?
We are helping you draft the 3A zone. Yes.
Okay.
That's part of the project.
Got it.
The second one here is really just like introducing different kinds of housing types. We were talking about this earlier, but the zoning regulations in terms of what's allowed from like today on to tomorrow are only allowing single family or 2-family homes. So we want to introduce different kinds of housing types, working towards that little to middle housing options goal, because the more types of homes you have, the more kinds of people you can accommodate in terms of their different sorts of needs. Older people have different needs, younger people have different needs, people at different income levels have different needs, people at different life stages have different needs. So some people, may not want or can't afford, or it's just too big, a big multi-bedroom single family home. So when these, probably not so common, but will happen, opportunities for redevelopment or infill development happen, you want to make sure that there's at least an option, an opportunity for someone to develop a different type of home than just a single family home, because the median price of a single family home in Nahant is $950,000. If you want to have home ownership options that are more attainable than almost $1 million home, you got to have smaller housing types that are different. So that's what this is about. It's about just taking the existing zoning bylaw and then saying we'll also allow these other housing types.
Right.
Okay, so with that, I'm gonna go to the next one, and it is definitely a technical wonky one. I'm gonna try and make it as simple as possible. So we've talking about 40B, talking about 3A. Here's another number and letter for you. 40R is the state's smart growth overlay zoning district. It is a tool that's been around for quite a while that the state offers. It's essentially a template zone that allows you to set specific criteria that's really well suited for when you have maybe a couple sites in a smaller zoning area as opposed to a larger one, because you can be really specific about the requirements and regulations that you put in this zone. It functions as an overlay, so it will go on top of underlying zoning and allow these regulations for a developer to use. The reason we are recommending it is because as we go and look at complying with the 3A regulations, this can be a really good template to use rather than trying to build our own 3A zoning district from scratch. But the really big advantages here are, this is an existing state tool. It already has an affordability requirement, meaning it's going to require a certain percent of housing units that are built in this zone in a development to be affordable. So, you know, say it was like a unit, like a 12 unit development. And maybe this zoning district would require 3 of those units to be affordable. That's already built into this template. So you don't have to go to the state and say, you know, we want to have affordability requirements. There's not clarity about what communities are going to have to do to prove that affordability requirements are financially feasible. That's all very technical, wonky talk, but what it really boils down to is that this is a pre-existing state tool that will actually require some units in a new development through the zone to be affordable. But best of all, if you adopt this zone, the state gives the town of Nahant money that can be used to make capital improvements near the development. So if you adopt a smart growth overlay district, you can get funding to, say, upgrade the sidewalks or, you know, create some open space or whatever kind of improvements that you want to make in that area. So there's a lot of advantages to it. And I think as we look at doing 3A, this will be a really good zone, like template zoning district to use. I know it's very technical. I will assure you that there are many communities in the Commonwealth that have 40R districts, and, you know, smart growth overlay districts. And many of them that have these districts are actually just applying to the state to see if they already comply with 3A because they're pretty close. But the reason it makes sense specifically in Nahant is because your 3A areas are probably going to be pretty small. And this is really well suited to create regulations for a smaller area. And it's going to make sure you get affordable housing. And if you adopt it, the state's going to give you funding. Any questions or thoughts on that one? Okay. I'm going to move on. So the next set are all policy strategies. So these are different policies that the town would use to advance our goals here. This first strategy is something that came up when we were looking at development opportunities. So we've learned that, you know, there was some groundwork for a development agreement, but not a agreement, and some authorization to sell the Coast Guard housing site, the Coast Guard site. And what are recommending here is essentially to, in light of our goals to produce more affordable housing, comply with 40B and comply with 3A, to reevaluate what the town would like to see on this site as it prepares to sell the site. You know, we know from the financial situation that this is something that needs to happen. We know that something was approved at town meeting. So we are simply saying to look at what was approved at town meeting, see if it still makes sense, and see if we should make changes. Now, as a part of that, if there is a development agreement concerning the site, MAPC is recommending that you provide a right to return to anybody who had to be displaced from this site. That is a best practice for development agreements when an area where people were able to live affordably or in affordable housing were displaced, or that area was redeveloped. When you have a development agreement, you can make the developer give a right to return to anyone who was displaced. So we think that that is something that the town should do if it reconsiders this this site as a part of a sale and a development agreement. What is the committee's thoughts?
I entirely agree with that.
But that precludes it. These properties wouldn't be affordable housing properties. It would be market rate. The displaced individual would have a first right of refusal to buy the property, buy a new single family home if that's what the developer did.
Well,
unless-
in your part of your development agreement, you could require the developer to build like some market rate and some affordable, and then you, through a right to return, would be giving anyone who is displaced from that site the option to go for the market rate, like the first option at the market rate or the first option at an affordable unit. In that agreement, since it's your land and you're selling it and you're making the agreement, you can like really tell the developer what you want, and you can ask them to build affordable housing.
However, this was put forth at a
Michelle.
town meeting. Wait a
Michelle,
second.
hold on.
What?
It just if it's done under a comprehensive permit and they're put out to rental agreement, they're made as rentals, then it
Right.
would all count for 40B.
But I guess the follow-up question I have is, since this was put forth at an annual town meeting and the citizens voted on it, and we'd have to go back and review it, I thought there was language in there that the individual lots would be sold at market rate. So I don't know if we can actually go back and change that without bringing it back before the town.
Yeah, and that may be the case, that it would have to go back before a town meeting, and in no way are we recommending to override what the residents of Nahant have decided at town meeting. We are recommending that you may want to reconsider opportunities for this site, and if it's going to be a development agreement that needs to be approved at town meeting, then to go back to town meeting. Just like all the other development opportunities in this plan, where if you're talking about changing zoning, or likely if you're selling publicly owned land, that there's going to be town meeting or some other kind of public process.
I would think that we can recommend that decision be looked at again. And I think people are thinking now that some of them could be sold as housing lots to offset the 1.8 million that we owe, while perhaps the Goddard Road area could be redeveloped differently as affordable housing. So I don't think there's any contradiction about us recommending the town meeting look at that situation again.
I think we're gonna have a busy town meeting next year.
Yes. We're setting ourselves up for a lot. This and 3A.
One thing that I'd like to say is if we could have access to review the plans that were approved, or the the conversations that were voted on, that would be helpful for us as we work through the minutia of this.
So we can get you definitely copies of the meeting minutes from town meetings, so you can see what the dialogue was and what the vote was in the language in the article. And
Okay,
that will help you in terms of formulating more finite around the policy strategy. For this one, though, why wouldn't it also be included in housing stability?
I think it could apply to housing stability. You're right. I think it is applicable.
Okay. I mean, again, these are all recommendations going into the plan. We still will be going through other iterations of meetings to get to the final product, so it's helpful.
Yeah. Okay, the second one, which is relevant to the first one as well as the other development opportunities, is to look at development opportunities where the land is publicly owned and when appropriate, and you determine that land is a good development site that you want to work with, to basically partner with a developer through a request for proposal process, an RFP process. And basically what that is that you would say, Nahant is wanting to develop this publicly owned site with affordable housing. And by the way, this recommendation is also saying that when this happens, to have affordable housing as well as open space that's open to the public at large, is in addition to any residents of affordable housing. So talking about taking these publicly owned sites that we're identifying in the plan, and we're saying that we want to put out a request for proposals to developers. They can, put out proposals for how they would develop the site. And in this request for proposals, you'd be saying, we want to have this many affordable housing units. We want to have townhouses. We want to have, this is what we would like. This is how we will score a proposal higher if we see this type of development. And as a part of that, we want part of this site to be a park that is open to everyone. Then you evaluate those proposals, you pick one that you like, and then that becomes your development partner. And then you enter into an agreement where you may lease the site to them or sell the site to them at below market on the condition that they're going to do what's in your agreement, which is build affordable housing or whatever else that you want to happen there. And we're saying that you really should be looking at affordable housing, maybe even market rate housing with it, and definitely public open space and parks, so that we're working towards that fourth goal, that we're not just building lots of housing, but we're building neighborhoods. And so if we're going to utilize publicly owned land, we're going to partner with a developer, we also want to get the benefit of public open space that everybody can use as well. So this is something that you would be applying to any publicly owned sites that end up being final recommendations in the plan. And you'd be permitting it through a comprehensive 40B comprehensive process, most likely.
So would this apply to spring and then we'll vote?
It could, if you decided that that's what you wanted to do.
Okay.
So why this approach versus just having the non-housing authority develop affordable housing?
Well, your development partner could be the housing authority, but usually housing authorities don't have the resources to engage in development or aren't interested in doing that. Unless your housing authority is in a different boat. I mean, some are, but typically that would be like a larger housing authority. And even in that case, usually a housing authority needs to partner with a developer to do this.
Oh, nonprofit.
Mm-hmm.
And also, so we're saying permanently deed restricted affordable housing.
Yeah, I mean, it could be specific to the agreement, but definitely a deed restricted affordable housing. But it could be a mixture of affordable housing and market rate.
If you look at the Coast Guard housing concept now and put private residences along Castle Road, behind those would be the existing Nahant Nature Trail. There's there, and then Goddard Drive as a separate elderly or different kind of public housing development. That would all fit in to the kind of thing that you're describing, I think.
Yeah, I think a permanent deed restriction would be critical. And Nahant doesn't have a lot of extra land, as you found out. So I think, having whatever 40B numbers or impact that we can have, it's got to be permanent. Otherwise, we're just setting ourselves up to lose that if it's like a 20.
Yeah, no, this is a huge asset that you control. So you best believe you better be getting affordable housing and other community benefits from it if you're going to use it. If you're going to partner with a developer through an RFP process, you can spell out pretty much exactly what you want as long as it's reasonable in terms of finances. But by, leasing or selling at a low cost, you're really making a big impact on the financial situation. And that's what gives you the leverage to have a development agreement to say, we want affordable housing. This is the type that we want. We also want you to do maybe some townhouses that are market rate that we think might be good home buying options. We also want you to make a little park in the middle of it. You can put out a request and then see which developers give you what you like the best.
That may work in the town of Essex, but it doesn't work in Nahant quite that way. We just don't have the land area we have to be very, very specific and concentrated in how we think about it.
I agree.
I think that's the option of we just, through the housing trust, we bring more money to the table, and that changes the nature of the partnership, that where we have more control, more money. We don't have to give away as much control to developer.
You could bring a lot of different things into it to make it the best it can be. But I mean, a developer is going to be putting their private resources into it too. Okay, we've got about 20 minutes till 9:30, and I think we should try and aim to end then. So I'm gonna move forward. There are several other policy recommendations. I'm just going to describe all three of these, and then you let me know which ones you have questions about. So the first one, understanding that the town at the town meeting coming up just around the corner is looking at some regulations around short-term rentals. We think it's appropriate to also consider something new that the state is allowing cities and towns to do, which is to put an impact fee on short-term rentals. You have to remember that if someone's just taking a housing unit and they're using it as an Airbnb or a short-term rental, and they don't live there and they don't intend to, that's taking a unit out of the housing stock that people could have. And when we're already really stressed with our housing stock, we don't want to put additional stresses like that on it. Some short-term rentals, to a degree are an okay thing, and they could bring, other benefits, but you don't want them to eat up too much of your housing stock. So you're already looking at that at town meeting. But what I'm saying is take another step here, and the state is now allowing communities to put up to a 3% fee on a short-term rental. So when someone registers a short-term rental, you're going to be able to collect revenue from it, and then you can put that revenue in your affordable housing trust and use it to advance all these other housing goals and recommendations. 4 is to basically look at what currently exists in terms of a property tax reduction program for income eligible seniors that volunteer for administrative purposes at the town. This is really kind of a simple recommendation to just basically evaluate how that program's going, if it's making a big impact for cost burdened seniors, and to see if it makes potential, from a financial standpoint, to potentially expand this program to more income eligible households, or maybe increase the tax reduction. We're not really going into those details, but we're just saying, this is a good tool that you have right now. Why don't we evaluate it to see how well it's working, see if there's any opportunities to give it a bigger impact. The 5th one is to adopt a new specialized building code. So just very recently, the state created these new building codes that go a step past the stretch code in terms of making sure any new development is extremely energy efficient. There's certain pathways that you could take with this to be like net zero or passive house. That's a lot of technical language, but what you really want to know is that the more energy efficient the building is, the lower the utilities are going to cost. And that's going to help people who are struggling to afford their housing. And it's going to ensure anyone in a new housing unit, affordable or market rate, is going to have really low utility costs. It's also going to have the added benefit of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, which is, something very important to pay attention to, especially when you're a coastal community like Nahant. This could also open you up to some potential funding that's associated with, the state's clean energy initiatives. So that works towards goals 3 and 4. Any questions or comments on these 3?
So number 3 is something that will probably happen because it's been proposed in the regulations for short-term rentals.
That's
Which
in
there's-
the regulations that are being proposed at town meeting now.
Yes.
Oh, that's good to hear.
So, and then number 4, I believe we already have this program in place.
We do.
Right, yeah, you do.
Okay.
I'm suggesting that you evaluate whether it would make sense to expand it.
Okay.
So I still think you want to have 3 in there, even if you're proposing it.
Yes, no, I'm fine leaving them in there. It's just that these are things that are in motion, are going to be happening.
Yeah, but you want to make sure that that if that passes and you're levying that impact fee, that fee goes into the Affordable Housing Trust. So
That's the change, yeah.
so that
Mhm.
that money can be used.
Yep.
To advance these other recommendations.
So if we pass it this town meeting and we don't have the trust established, that's a little,
If you don't have the trust established yet, then you should earmark it.
okay.
You should earmark it until you establish the trust.
We just learned about the concept of the trust last meeting, and I haven't done any legwork on it. Are you aware of what it takes to establish one? Does it require action of selectmen as opposed to town meeting?
It's town meeting, Mike, but I think we can get it together pretty easily by our next town meeting.
A year
Yeah,
from
and
now?
I actually am not sure if it needs town meeting approval. I have to look that up, but those sorts of details we will have all spelled out in the plan once we determine which final recommendations make it. Because I actually don't think I mentioned this, but we want to really hone this down into, this is 13 recommendations right now. We want to really narrow that down into about 5 to 7, because we want it to be very much doable for you, so that all of these things are actually implemented. So part of the process is to take these to the public and see, what we think and what we learn, so that we can really hone in on the ones that are most important.
And by the
I do
way,
think- Go ahead.
this document in this form is going to be part of what's presented to the public in advance of the face-to-face.
No, this is going to be presented at the June in-person forum. The online open house is just going to be sites and the goals. And that is so because we know that it's going to take a lot of time and bandwidth to go through all these strategies. And so we wanted to separate them out a little bit to give people more time to process and think through them.
Good, thank you.
Well,
All right.
Mike, we can talk about the trust later, but I do think it requires a town meeting vote, which would establish, the makeup of the trust, how the trust is being funded, those types of things. So
Yeah, you're likely right about that. Basically, we'll spell it all out in the plan if that becomes a priority recommendation.
okay.
It sounds like it will be, but we want to take this to the public.
Yeah.
Okay, there are just 2 more. These are programming strategies. We've gathered some information from the town about the town's capacity and current resources, and Based on that, we think it's best not to establish these programs here locally with local funds, but to use local resources to really promote them. The first is a program to help people buy, the first is a program to help seniors age in place and stay in their homes if they would like to, so to improve their housing stability. And the second one is helping folks buy their first home. There are programs, grants, resources at the state and federal level for each of these that are really great, but many people do not know about them or have difficulty accessing them. So in the first one, we're talking about state grants and programs that could say, help a senior put in a modification to their home that makes it wheelchair accessible, or anything else that that person may need to remain in their home, because as you age, it's harder to get around, it's harder to maintain a home. So part of the recommendations is introducing a lot of smaller housing types, so a senior might have the option to downsize and stay in Nahant. But if a senior wants to stay in their larger home, then they're going to need some support in making changes to the home so that it suits their needs. So there are really low interest loans, there are grants, there are other programs that seniors can access to help them do that, or to help them with paying utilities. There's Raft, lots of programs like that. So what we're talking about here is gathering all of those things, which we can do through this plan, and putting it on the town website, but then also partnering with organizations like AARP and others to have events and workshops to really connect the community here in Nahant to these programs, and help them and be advocates for them in applying for those things. And similarly, the second one is to promote federal and state first-time home buying programs. There are a lot of really good ones in Massachusetts compared to other states, but this is really important. I mean, when we consider the high cost of buying a home in town, even if you're introducing condos and smaller housing types that are more affordable, it's still going to be really hard for someone to buy that home. So there are programs where you can basically have a favorable or really deferred interest loan. There's programs you can get direct funding to use on a down payment. One of the really good first-time home buying programs also eliminates private mortgage insurance. If you put less than 20% down on a house, you have to pay private mortgage insurance each month. That's an extra expense that can make or break someone's ability to afford a home. If you're talking about $950,000 house, you're probably not putting 20% down. So eliminating that cost is big. First-time home buying classes, all of these things people don't know about or don't understand, or maybe aren't able to access. So again, promoting these things through the town's resources and really targeting that at the folks who grew up here in Nahant and may like to put down roots and stay here and raise their own kids. So those are those two strategies that are program based. Any questions about those?
I'd just like to say to Michelle, are we specifically reaching out to the board of the Council on Aging? And
Yes.
meet them so they know all about our process here?
Yes. I've
Okay.
exchanged some notes with Mary Minor, and she's fairly new in her role. She's only been with us about 18 months. And so a lot of what she's been doing has really been supporting the residents who have been looking for assistance. But some of the things that we've talked about around housing instability have come through with her, but we don't have, as a community right now, any programs in place. Do we need things to consider? Are there areas like AARP to tap into to connect residents? Absolutely. I think she'll be open to seeing what we can do or pointing them into directions that can help them bring that information to the community.
In addition, I think I would recommend that you reach out to the board members of the Council on Aging, not just Ms. Minor.
Yes, let me make a note. Okay, yeah.
And
So that's
that's
Angela Bonin and such, so yeah, you're right. and
That
can
would
probably
be
reach
a
out to them.
whole section of the final plan report to document, existing resources and committees like the Council on Aging and their current capacity and, how that they can be helpful in implementing these sorts of recommendations.
No, that
Alright.
sounds good.
Well, that's all the recommendations. We'll basically plan our engagement at the June forum around these. The online open house, as has been said, will focus on the goals and the opportunity areas and sites. Basically, in terms of next steps, we've created a press release for the June forum, a flyer for the June forum. Michelle, I believe, is going to print out the flyer and hand that out at town meeting to promote that event. We will send you these materials next week. As Christian said, you're a big part of this outreach effort, so we want you to invite your friends and neighbors and folks. So we want to hear from as many Nahanters as possible. And then we'll also have the online open house link up and running relatively soon. And once that's up, we'll ask for your help in distributing that as well. But really the next steps are just to promote these two engagement events. And once we have those, we'll really hear from the public, and we'll gather all of that information and start making more narrow decisions about what final recommendations end up in this plan. Any questions about next steps?
No, we have a little bit of work to do, but I think this is great. I don't have any immediate thoughts. I know we covered quite a bit, so I don't want to keep anyone much longer than we need to, but I do want to cover a few things. For the May 20th town meeting, I'm going to be having a table. I think, Christian, you were going to come into town and join me.
Christian had to take off, but yes,
That's right, he had to try.
he is going to join you.
Okay, so then my thought was to host the table from like 11:30 to 1, like an hour and a half with materials about HPP, the upcoming events, the virtual open house, and answer questions from anybody that had any, in terms of what the committee's been doing. You're open to come and sit with me if you want, but I think if Christian and I are going to be the only ones managing it, I think we should be okay. Okay, and I think we talked about the change in the date for June 15th, so we'll make sure to get that on the community calendar, so it's out there. Do we want to meet next week? Is there anything the committee wants to dive into a little bit further around the goals or the strategies?
I'm good.
I think it would be great if we were able to think about these things, then send our comments to you, Michelle, which you could then redistribute to the rest of the people, not just any member of the committee.
Yeah, and that's perfect. So what I'll do is follow up with an email, and you can respond back to me. I will collect all the feedback, organize it, and then redistribute it out so folks can take a look at what the feedback was without the names, obviously. So at least we know what people are thinking about, and we can certainly get that back to MAPC as well.
Great.
Okay.
If you are going to do that, I would suggest next week, because if there's anything that we want to incorporate into it, from this point forward, we're preparing all of the materials for the forum. So we want to make sure that, there's nothing that we're taking out or drastically changing.
Great. Okay. So I know we're bumping up to town meeting, and if we don't need to meet next week, then we can, obviously wait until the following week to reconvene, if that works with folks. Not
Yep.
hearing any
As long
feedback.
as there's no major changes in terms of what we're,
Okay.
I think that's fine.
All right. Then what I'm going to do is two things. First, we've had members of the public tonight, which is fantastic. So I just want to go through a couple of things. We had a question regarding, are we saying no to more affordable housing as an option to the public? And can this be listed as an option if it is an option. So the question is really, do we really need to have affordable housing as an option in the community? We're trying to comply with the regulations of 40B and 3A. We've heard feedback from the community that, you know, people who live here want to stay here. And we certainly heard from the first in community engagement that there is a significant need for more senior housing. So we're trying to address the needs of the community. Hopefully the outcome of this committee and the plan will do that.
Might be the best way to describe that is there is a cost to the town of not making provisions for affordable housing in terms of if susceptibility to hostile 40B developments.
Correct. Let's
Public
see.
allowed to speak right now, Michelle?
One moment, Cassandra, I will. I'm just scrolling through the rest of the chat. And I think we're at, I know there were some questions about the annual town meeting from 2021 and the vote that was taken on the Coast Guard housing. If you look in the chat, I put in the meeting minutes and the warrant. So next, I will allow members of the public to speak. If you do speak, please say your first and last name and where you live, and you can ask your question.
Great. So my question simply was, should we, I'm Cassandra Roy, I live at 42 Spring Road. My question would be, should we, say to the public that we do not have to comply as a town with this first? Like, I almost feel like we're telling the public that we have to comply with this. I think it's a little deceptive to go and to have them, look at the different properties that are being scoped out when we do not have to do this.
So I think we said if we don't do it, first of all, if we don't comply with 40B, it puts the town in a place for a hostile project that could come in by a developer. That means they could take a X size lot and build, a 3 or 4 story building on top of it of condos.
10 story.
Or 10 stories. And we can't stop it.
Yeah.
The other is with 3A MBTA communities, we did hear from the Attorney General that she plans to go after communities who do not want to comply with 3A in terms of looking at those, putting the right zonings in place and allowing for multifamily housing for families. So that could potentially put the town in a bind when it comes to certain state funding that we get, funding that we might get for the schools, funding that we might get for the roads. So do we roll the dice and say, let's try to put something in place as a plan that the state will approve, but is thoughtful and is appropriate for our town? We know the town is clustered. We know the town is congested in some areas. So obviously we would exclude certain areas and deem those certain districts. But I think we have to think of the affordability for the town as well. We can't just rely on real estate taxes to pay all of our costs as well. Right? We look towards federal and state funding to supplement. We don't want to kind of cut the cord on that if these regulations actually need to be addressed.
No, I understand that. I just think it's, again, a little deceptive to kind of back folks up into a corner to make them think that we have to do this. There are many towns that don't comply with these regulations. So I think
maybe that too. You're right.
Those could be listed. There are several communities right near us that don't comply. And I think the fact that Nahant is so small, we have a little bit of wiggle room there. So, and only very few folks use MBTA here.
Michelle,
I'll just say the other thing am concerned about is the affordability for our seniors in senior housing. We've heard a tremendous amount of feedback for people who are retiring, who want to downsize and still live in the community, but there isn't an option. So trying to develop that option would definitely be a benefit to the community.
But I think our goal here is to come up with a strategy that complies with the law. And that's a reasonable goal. And I think we can do it.
Will we be fined if we don't comply with it? Just out of curiosity.
I don't think so.
I don't think there's actually a fine,
but developers. A developer can come in here and the only thing they're interested in is making a profit. And if they can walk over us and they are able to do that if we're not in compliance or if we don't have a plan. So what we're trying to do is protect the town from unwanted development.
So
There's a
I-
question. Oh, go ahead, Kelsey.
I have a
if you wanna
question.
ask
This
it.
is Kelsey Anderson. I want to understand the regulation regarding the MBTA because of the proximity there. I would like an outline of what state funding we receive because of that. And then understand like what the usage is of the MBTA buses. That would be really helpful and would, drive some transparency around this. I just don't think that the public is necessarily informed. And I also feel that there are some community members that are more outspoken. So I think we need to get more people involved to give their opinions.
Sure.
Because the senior housing, like I hear it, but it's mostly the same people over and over bringing that forward. And I think we
Mhm.
just need more of a diverse perspective.
Sure. Kelsey, and Cassandra too, can you just state for the record your addresses? Because we didn't hear that from you.
Cassandra did share her address.
Oh, you
40
missed.
Spring
I did. And I
Okay,
actually
thank
think in the comments section too, I think Kelsey had addressed, wondering on this committee what everyone's addresses were too. So I don't know in the spirit of transparency, if that could be discussed.
I took that as a note and I'm happy. I live at 29 Ocean Street.
33 High Street.
38 Ocean Street.
31 Summer Street.
119 Castle Road.
We have a
Harris
member
Street.
who's not here that lives on 3 Tri-Mountain Road and another member that lives in senior housing.
Okay, I just have a question. There's like an open plot behind, I think it may be on High Street. Why wasn't that taken into consideration?
It is.
It is, okay. I just
Yep.
want to make sure.
Yep. Nope. It definitely was considered.
Is it on the map?
Yes. It's
Okay,
on our map to be proposed.
And then the proposed removal was the country club, which is on Ocean.
No, the
Oh.
proposal is a plot of land at the end of Pond Street, where there's a paper road. It's, if you look, it's 2 ways of looking at it. You can go down Willow Road and the houses it's land that's behind those houses. Or if you go down Pond Street, where Pond Street stops, it actually continues on, there's a paper road and I don't know, I have to look it up. I looked it up once before, 30,000 square feet or 40,000 square feet of land. It's in a private trust.
Basically to the east end of the golf course.
Yes.
Yeah. From I know this isn't up for discussion, but from a public's perspective, it seems like the east side of Nahant isn't really being tapped into or considered. It does feel like the Spring Road area, something that was invested in through the courts, is kind of the main point of conversation. It's a little stifling to be in this area because we do have our fair share of housing already.
and
think
to
that-
add to, it's very, living across the street from that housing, it's very disruptive. And again, very concerned around the transient neighborhood, like protecting this neighborhood here, because there is a lot of coming and going, and like someone else said, seems like this area is being impacted more so than others. So would recommend more to be more dispersed.
Yeah, I agree.
I
also think
Let me just add here,
Yeah.
Michelle, that I agree with you, Kelsey. I think we can do a much better job on Spring Road and Emerald Road than what we currently have. I think that needs to be improved. I think it can be improved. I think it can benefit the town and it can benefit the neighborhood. The 3 largest places that we have on a map, the 4 largest places, is the Coast Guard housing, the Gray Store Road behind the Spindrift, the church, and the country club. Those are the largest areas on the map that we've outlined so far.
okay, yeah,
So what I'm saying is that I agree with you 100%. I'm disgusted with the condition of the of the housing on Spring Road and Emerald Road. And I think the town can and should do a much better job with that.
I'm Mark, thank you for saying that. I'm glad you agree because, you know, I work from home and I hear yelling and screaming, and the condition of those homes are just, they're not, they don't look great. And so our fear is if more houses are built, how will they be upkept? And, you know, what types of folks are going to be living on these? I hear screaming every day when I'm on work calls, and it's just when you see Spring Road on the map, it's like, okay, we're going to add more to this. And yeah, so I thank you for acknowledging that, Mark.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Kelsey.
Well, thank you to both of you for your feedback. Definitely was helpful. So the only thing outstanding for the committee, you know, I wasn't getting a sense that we wanted to meet next week. But if we think it might be valuable just to look at the map one more time in terms of just debating certain locations and options and stuff, I'm certainly open to that. Just looking for the committee's feedback on it if they want to meet one more time. Okay, then if there isn't any feedback on that, then what I will do is request a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you, Mark.
I second.
Second, and a second from Patty. Okay, roll call vote. Michael,
Aye.
Patty,
Aye.
Mark,
Aye.
Jim, Patrick.
Aye.
The chair is aye. The meeting will adjourn at 9:40 p.m. Thank you so much for tonight. Thank you to MAPC for your assistance and our residents who participated. And stay tuned for more and have a lovely evening.
What fun.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care.